Yo, Atlas speaking and welcome to part 22 of What If I Was Reincarnated in the Naruto world as the legendary Konoha outsider. Let the tale begin. Chapter 424. While the world of chakra and shinobi was more dangerous, when it came to the depiction of horror, Takuma's original world was far ahead. The internet had allowed people to share their twisted imaginations with other equally twisted people who built upon it using everything from words to advanced computer graphics. The result was a constant stream of a vast variety of horror born from the collective imagination. Takuma's special brand of horror was a derivation of that very result. Jinjutsu, the Banquet of Abyss. Jinjutsu was a special tool. It wasn't as straightforward as Taijutsu, nor was it as versatile as ninjutsu. Not everyone was capable of learning Jinjutsu, and even if they were, it had several restrictions. Any decently strong Jinjutsu required an inordinate amount of focus. Most users couldn't move while they were casting. It was easy to break, and once it broke, the target was undamaged. The last part, however, was a misconception. It was true that Jinjutsu left behind no physical damage, but what about mental? The target would still experience the Jinjutsu through all their senses during the time it takes to break it. Takuma felt a dark delight at the sight of Khan's pale face, sweating in terror. His eyes were bloodshot, and his breathing ragged. Takuma could feel Khan's fear as if the Jinjutsu had fed it back to him through every one of his senses. He hoped Riku was watching with just as much satisfaction before he opened his mouth to speak. "How about you piss your pants and get this over with already? You're a terrified cripple. Your chances of not dying just plummeted. Pathetic," Takuma said softly, but it was enough for Khan to hear over his thumping heart. "Not that I'd let you live. Even if I die here today, it'll be after your death, Khan. Kill him." Khan managed through his gritted teeth before yelling, "Kill him!" The identical agent duo pulled their swords out on command. Takuma did the same. Their blades were broader and longer than his, but he raised his sword and pointed it right at Khan, whose face twisted with a touch of fear. The duo slowly stepped forward. Takuma gazed at them with caution. Khan said they were his personal Grim Reapers, handpicked especially for him by Danzo. Ignoring the terrifying fact that Danzo was even aware of him, these two were selected by him, with his infinite experience in matters of assassinations and nefarious murders. That alone made the pair in front of him dangerous. There was a second of silence where both parties simply watched, waiting to see if the other would take action, before they moved simultaneously. As Takuma rushed forward, the agents darted to either side of him. He threw a kunai at the blue-masked one, backing it with chakra, but it was effortlessly dodged. The kunai's augmented speed made Blue slow down just enough that he was now running a second later than his counterpart. Takuma widened that gap by running straight towards Red, giving him enough time to handle one fair exchange at the least. He and Red's sword sang on impact, only for Red's sword to spark with electricity. A jolt traveled through his body, leaving weakness in its wake. It was only a moment, but Takuma almost lost control of his sword, and his own body besides. He barely managed to throw himself out of harm's way, coming up halfway onto a knee. Takuma looked up to see that Red and Blue had seamlessly switched positions. Blue's sword sparked with electricity as he swung it down. Takuma managed to put his sword up, but the moment they clashed, he again felt the current judder through the blade and weakened him. Blue's sword easily overpowered him in his moment of weakness, leaving a shallow wound on the side of his thigh. Red switched right back in with a horizontal slash that aimed to take his head off. Already low enough to the ground, he let himself fall and allowed the sword to whistle over his head. Without a proper footing, his options for evasion were limited. Worst of all, he couldn't make any contact with either sword. As Red made space for his partner to continue their merciless attack, Takuma braced on all fours and barreled into Blue the moment he was within reach. Without the space, Blue couldn't swing his sword, but he could still shock Takuma, who felt the electric jolt weaken him. But his body's momentum carried over, and they tumbled to the ground. Blue managed to come out on top, but Takuma kicked him in the stomach before he could straddle him. The root agent folded around his heel and flew right into his partner, finally giving Takuma the chance to stand up. Meanwhile, Red managed to catch Blue, and the two seemed ready to re-engage him. Takuma threw a smoke bomb at them, and while Blue instinctively cut it, the bomb exploded right in their faces. The minute that he saw that broadsword twitch towards the bomb, he turned around and rushed straight towards Khan. Takuma could tell that fighting these two would be difficult, but the same couldn't be said about Khan. Khan recoiled when he saw Takuma's expression as the latter sprinted towards him. There was a hunger and bloodlust in his eyes that saw him hesitate, dropping his kunai to reach for the sword at his back. Takuma's grin widened, but it was too late to regret the choice, much less do anything else. Khan barely raised his sword to meet Takuma as he jumped to close the gap between them. Their swords snarled against each other, and a frothing layer of sparks scattered through their air. The sleeve around Khan's shoulder ripped apart, and he felt his joint almost pop out of its socket. Fortunately, the lack of one arm had made the other much stronger, and he managed to hold his own. Takuma suddenly changed the angle of his sword as he touched down, redirecting Khan's sword and batting his arm away. With his only arm out of commission, Khan had no way to retaliate. "I need to get away," Khan thought as panic gripped his heart. From the very start, he knew he wasn't supposed to be involved in the fight. The Gemini brothers were supposed to take care of Takuma on their own. His job was to ensure they got enough uninterrupted time with Takuma to get the job done without any external obstacles. He had already done that, but when he thought about Takuma far beyond his gaze, without knowing he was the architect of this death, well, the thought didn't sit well with him. He wanted to talk with Takuma before he died, watch the moment of his death as the fires of life and any hope of survival slowly drained from his eyes. Khan planned to provoke him into doing something stupid. Then, he'd fall back to let the brothers do their job before returning. But then... Hey, you know what this means, right? That bitch-face old fuck Danzo didn't trust you with the job, so he sent someone else to do it for you. But you'll never be able to take your revenge. Even if I die here today, it won't be because of you. You're utterly useless. How about you piss your pants and get this over with already? Pathetic. He couldn't let Takuma die just like that. He wanted to be the one to kill him, so Khan made a mistake by lingering. Granted, he tried to fall back, but before he could, Takuma slammed his foot over Khan's, locking it in place. He could no longer escape. Takuma's fist smashed into his throat. Khan barely managed to move his chin in the way. It absorbed some of the force, but the fist still struck its intended target. He felt the force hit his spine through his neck and nearly collapsed there and then. Silver flashed through his darkening vision. Khan staggered back, just not in time. Takuma's sword buried itself just above, barely missing the bones. For a moment, everything slowed for Khan. He watched blood spurt out of his arm, then hang in the air as Takuma pulled his sword back. The horrifying, blood-filled vision he had seen in the Jinjutsu was no longer the most terrifying thing he had seen today. This, losing both his arms, was his nightmare. He screamed from the top of his lungs and tried to escape, but Takuma punched him in the stomach, knocking the air out of his body, and cut off his screams. He grabbed him by his hair to stop him from falling. Their eyes met, and Takuma, his face covered in blood splatter, smiled. "I already took one, I might as well hack off this arm, too. Don't worry, I'll still kill you afterwards." In that moment, the version of Takuma in the Jinjutsu and reality overlapped in Khan's eyes as the bastard who had ruined his life raised the bloodied sword. Straight-faced. Takuma was on cloud 9. Khan's miserable face twisted in dread brought him levels of joy he'd rarely felt in this life. But no matter how much he was enjoying this, he promised Gray that he would kill the bastard here, thus letting go of the opportunity to relish inflicting pain over a longer period. So, in return, he was going to make Khan's last moments hellish. But that would have to wait. There quick, he clicked his tongue when he saw the identical duo in his peripheral vision. It had only been a few seconds since he had charged at Khan. Grudgingly, Takuma released Khan's hair and jumped away to dodge a chain made of pure lightning. Just as he dodged the crackling chain, another flash of lightning in the form of a bolt zapped towards him. Takuma held his breath before twisting in the air to face the incoming attack, positioning his sword in front of him. There was only a split second where the lightning chakra gathered around the sword before jumping straight up. In that moment, before he could even place his saws on the ground, he let go of his sword. The lightning chakra stuck to the metal, but a small portion of it jumped through the air and zapped him. His body tensed for a couple of seconds as the lightning ran rampant through his body. Ugh, that's tingly, Takuma grunted as he managed to avoid tanking the entirety of a C-rank jutsu. The weakness wasn't as bad as with the Kenjutsu, but it wasn't going away. He glared at the identical agents, who had both thrown a lightning release ninjutsu at him. They hadn't made any attempt to rescue Khan, and even now, they weren't looking at their peers. It seems there was more going on here than Khan knew himself. The one-armed bastard's life wasn't a high priority of his teammates. Lightning release and Kenjutsu that put him at extreme disadvantage at melee range. Takuma frowned with a bad feeling. Khan had called them his Grim Reapers. He now knew they had said this. His two affinities were water and earth. Water strengthened lightning. Earth was weak against lightning. Unless they had a second nature, he had no type advantage against the brothers, and even if they did, so long as they leveraged their advantage over him, it wouldn't matter. There was also the numbers angle to consider. Frankly, it was the only thing eliminating his strong suit in close-quarters combat. He needed a different strategy. Chapter 425, Takuma gazed at the identical agents. There had to be a reason why they were given their identical personas. From their short exchange before, it was clear they had great coordination with each other. He even considered that they might be true identical twins under their masks who were brought up together as shinobi. Twins, he muttered to himself. He signed the necessary seals, and a moment later, a shadow clone emerged from the plume of smoke, creating an identical twin of his own. Takuma had considered sending a shadow clone to the meeting with Inomoto, but he was impatient. If he sent a shadow clone, he would have had to wait until after the conversation was over to find out what was talked about, and he had no idea how long it would take. He couldn't wait. Not to mention, Inomoto had revealed that he knew about ANBU, and still risked calling him. Given his personality, Inomoto would have had a reason not to be afraid. And that didn't bode well with him. But the most important reason was that he wanted to handle it himself. A shadow clone was a copy of himself, but at the same time, there was a persistent thought in the back of his mind: what if he sent a clone to make an important decision, but the clone made the wrong choice? Takuma and clone were identical, and he was just as likely to make a mistake or wrong choice as they were, but in that case, he wanted to be the one to make the mistake instead of blaming the clone and then blaming himself afterwards for sending a clone. He didn't want to regret those what-ifs. And truthfully, Inomoto wasn't a lethal threat. Nothing would have changed even if Inomoto had brought some friends along. The only reason Takuma had geared up in the first place was that the proposed meeting location was a training field. "Maintain your distance," Takuma said to the clone while picking up his sword. Both sides moved simultaneously. Takuma weaved the hand seals for earth release, earth flow spears, and slammed his foot into the ground. The chakra from his saws shot forward through the ground until it reached just a few steps in front of the running agents. A dozen earthen spikes, each 4 to 5 feet tall, pierced the earth beneath their feet. Both of them jumped to dodge, but a spike shot up from directly beneath Red's lead foot, causing him to stumble right into another rising spike. He barely managed to move his face out of the way, but it rammed into his shoulder. Blue, on the other hand, managed to avoid the spikes completely. Around the same time, the clone finished signing his own set of hand seals and pushed his palms into the ground. Earth release, flying thrown spikes. The spikes from Takuma's jutsu broke away from the ground and floated into the air. The clone waved his arm, and the spikes began spinning as they shot towards Blue. He raised his sword to meet them, and lightning chakra flooded the blade. The hardened earth split like flimsy clay as the sword went through it and obliterated it into dust and loose mud. But as Blue cut the spike, Takuma sprinted past him towards Red. Blue tried to stop him, but more earthen spikes hurtled his way, giving him no choice but to step forth and face the spikes. Red immediately saw Takuma running towards him and barely raised his sword in time to block a kunai. Takuma's heart gave an elated lurch as he sped up. The lack of sparks meant he dealt enough damage to disrupt his focus, and therefore the lightning released Kenjutsu. The Kenjutsu was a problem because it limited his strengths, but it wasn't the first time he had faced it. Ninro, who also had a strong lightning release affinity, had learned a jutsu that shocked the target on touch. He had learned it to counter melee fighters like Takuma and Masaki. The key difference between Ninro and the agents was that his friend, unlike the root agents, was not a melee fighter and learned his jutsu for protection and insurance. In contrast, the root agents were comfortable in close combat and used their Kenjutsu for offense. Moreover, while Ninro's ninjutsu did more damage, it was a single charge attack. The agent's Kenjutsu did very little damage but lasted much longer, which was perfect for melee. Takuma could tank damage, but he couldn't afford to lose his guard every time he was in spitting range. Feinting a kick, he slid around Red, readying his manage to block it at the last moment, but Takuma didn't dare slow down and push the agent not to give him even a single second to reapply the lightning release Kenjutsu. He sidestepped in the injured shoulder's direction and swung his sword. Red was quick, but with one hand out of the play, he couldn't avoid the sword. It ripped through his gear and opened a gash in his side. Takuma clicked his tongue at the shallow attack and reset his stance. Damage was damage. If it wasn't enough, he would just snowball it until he could drive in a killing strike. But just at that time, he heard the clone shout, "Danger, your left!" He looked to his left to see a hyena form from lightning leap towards him. He dug his heels into the ground, sending dirt flying forward as he stopped and jumped back, narrowly avoiding the animal-shaped ninjutsu. But because of the angle, he'd missed the crackling link connecting the animal's tail to Blue's hands. Shit, Takuma cursed when the hyena turned directions and leapt back at him. In a last-ditch attempt, he hurled a kunai at the ninjutsu, hoping it would explode before reaching him, but the hyena effortlessly sidestepped the projectile and jumped right into him. It was a world of pain as his body clutched up. It felt as though every muscle was being pulled all at the same time, while his nerve endings burned. But it wasn't fatal, even as he fought for his grip over his sword. He looked for Red, expecting the agent to retreat and gather himself, but instead, the masked man grabbed his sword with both hands, flooding it with lightning chakra. "Now!" Takuma exclaimed when he saw Red raise both of his shoulders and was reminded that he was fighting root agents and not some rogue in the backwaters. These guys were confident enough to target him in the Hidden Leaf Village. As Red brought his sword down, a water bullet batted his swing aside, slitting his gear and the skin beneath. It was only a flesh wound, but it managed to destroy the swing. Red didn't look back and immediately rolled on the ground a moment before 3 more water bullets ripped through the air. In the distance, the clone held both of his hands up to a floating globe of shimmering water. Water release, spirit water wave. The clone shot 3 more bullets in rapid succession at Red. Blue used the body flicker jutsu to reach Red. It was a risky move because people had no control while using the jutsu in transit, and even the best individuals took a moment to gather themselves upon exiting. There was absolutely no finesse in his actions either. He crashed into his partner in his attempt to get him out of the bullet's way. The clone frowned and shot more bullets. Though not exactly scalable, Spirit Water Wave had the potential to grow. Takuma had not only managed to make the bullets faster and bigger, but had also increased the ammo capacity. He dreamed that one day he could even develop the jutsu into a high-damage shotgun or a high-distance rifle. The agents didn't waste a single second recovering from their fall. Blue put his body in front of his injured partner and once again showcased an insane level of reflexes, cutting every single bullet while kneeling on the ground. Red also didn't sit still and threw a pair of smoke bombs long to obscure themselves from the clone. The clone emptied his entire ammo stock through the smokescreen, poking holes through the opaque smoke. He looked through the holes but failed to spot the agents. Takuma forced himself to get up. His entire body was shaking, and putting force on any muscle caused an inordinate level of pain, but it was on a manageable level. He had been hit worse, in the head at that. He was standing at an angle where he could see the agents through the thinning smoke around them. He spotted one of them and immediately yelled out, "Hand seals!" The clone immediately acted on the information and signed the hand seals for Earth release, Earth and Dome. He had learned more defensive ninjutsu, but it was still the one he was most proficient with, and a jutsu that could be boosted by actively channeling chakra, which was needed when the opponent knew lightning release. Takuma could tank a C-rank jutsu, but that wasn't the case for the clone. At that level, the clone would undoubtedly pop. Without knowing what was coming, using a defensive ninjutsu was the best possible option. An electro ball punched through the thinning smoke screen and headed straight towards the dome. Takuma breathed a sigh of relief. Even though lightning trumped Earth, the clone could still brute force it by pumping chakra through the jutsu. A second later, a much faster shapeless bolt of lightning shot out of the smoke. There was no time to think or do anything as the lightning bolt pierced the electro ball. Usually, the volatile chakra in both ninjutsu would trigger each other, causing a chain explosion in both jutsu. But Takuma watched as the spinning electro ball was absorbed into the lightning bolt, turning its blue hue into blinding white. The empowered lightning bolt then struck the dome like a missile, and milliseconds later, the dome blew up from the inside with such force that the hardened material of the dome turned into fine dust. He didn't need to feel the two energies rushing back to his body to know that his clone was dead. The smoke from the smokescreen was now gone, revealing the two identical agents. He had faced combination ninjutsu before. The root trainees who tried to assassinate him had used two C-rank ninjutsu in combination to attack him, but he didn't remember it being this powerful. This combination was much closer to a B-rank jutsu. I got it, he thought. The two agents were definitely trained together. They were constantly looking out for each other, which made it almost impossible to get in a big hit unless both of them were vulnerable. He looked at the identical agents. All of their coordination had been to cover each other's backs, which was impressive enough, but if that was it, he didn't think they would be given special identical agent personas. Now, he knew why they were dressed up as twins. They were in perfect sync with each other. Their ability lay in combining C-rank ninjutsu and pushing it to the next rank. They were almost too good at combination ninjutsu, and that sent a shiver down Takuma's spine. What if this wasn't their limit? What if they could combine B-rank ninjutsu as well? The more powerful the two ninjutsu, the harder it was to combine them. B-rank ninjutsu were too complicated to combine with another just as complicated a ninjutsu. But the difficulty was rewarded with something absurdly powerful that approached the level of the disastrous A-rank ninjutsu that were ridiculously difficult to learn. Did he have a way to survive the combination ninjutsu he had just seen? If Takuma used Earth Release, Earth Spear, he could survive it, but the moment he used his B-rank ninjutsu, it would break the barrier and introduce B-rank ninjutsu from the other side as well. And if his hunch was correct, and they managed to combine B-rank ninjutsu, how was he supposed to fight against something like that? Chapter 426, thinking a clone would be the perfect teammate was a mistake. Unlike the twins, who probably spent years working together, Takuma never trained for team combat with his clones. They rarely shared a common goal and instead divided responsibility between them, such as work and training, and went their separate ways. He was not Naruto. His combat style wasn't built around working together with clones. In fact, the only time he had his clones work together was on tedious office work. What should I do? Takuma thought. It was only speculation on his part, but if the twins could use combination ninjutsu at B rank, then he was in grave danger because he had nothing to protect himself against the destructiveness of that level. He glanced up at the sky and thought about the barrier that had gone up earlier. He didn't know what kind of barrier it was, and if it was meant to keep him inside or the commotion from escaping outside. Their location itself was a training field, commotion was more or less expected. Unless the entire field were set on fire, people wouldn't think much of whatever they did. Escape was an option, but he didn't want to let the opportunity go to waste. Killing Khan was a non-negotiable, but he couldn't let the twins leave either, nor would they let him kill the bastard. Capturing them alive didn't seem like an option for him, but as long as he could kill them, it would be another big blow to Root. As for the ones who erected the barrier, he would think about it if he were in a condition to do so afterwards. He glanced at his arms. The after effects of the lightning release were subsiding. He returned his sword to its scabbard. He tried his best to use his sword in a fight as per Campbell's instructions and gave it his best effort, but it was time to return to his bread and butter. Takuma quickly weaved hand seals, and a dense fog began to build around the area. Water release, hidden mist jutsu. His strategy was simple. B-rank jutsu were expensive to use. The twins had to be sure that their jutsu would hit for them to risk mixing the considerable amount of non-refundable chakra required for the jutsu. By shrouding the area with mist, the chances of them getting in a clear shot plummeted, bringing uncertainty that they would have to consider. It was also his best option to protect himself against a C-rank combination ninjutsu outside of using Earth Release, Earth Spear. A silence descended upon the field. The fast-paced battle crawled to a halt as both sides GRW wary of their unseen enemy. The mist was unforgiving on both sides. Takuma couldn't see either, and his enhanced hearing, which he had trained for operating within the mist, was entirely dependent on how much noise his opponent made. Statistically, he was at an advantage because the other side had more people capable of making noise. At the same time, those people were trained agents who had been put through hell and back in the name of training. Takuma thought about creating another shadow clone but decided against it. The cost was too high. It took a lot of chakra to make a shadow clone, who would then take half of what remained. He wanted to keep his reserves in one place to be ready for a B-rank jutsu. He slowly moved through the fog, listening for footsteps, breathing, whispers, or clinks of metal, but only got an eerie silence in return. It was also the time to see if the agents had any way to disperse the fog. Anything he would want to do within the fog would be moot if they cleared out the field. The moment the tense silence hit the half-minute mark, Takuma weaved hand seals once more. Earth Release, Earth Tremor Sense Jutsu. It had great synergy with Hidden Mist Jutsu because it allowed him to locate the positions of those around him, a great boon inside the near-opaque fog. There! Takuma rapidly signed the seals for Earth Release, Earth and Stone Bamboo Shoot. Instead of randomly created spikes over an area, the jutsu created spikes that all converged at a single spot. If he took out one of the agents, he could eliminate all chances of combination ninjutsu from being used against him. No scream, whimper, or grunt echoed through the fog. Takuma clicked his tongue and weaved the hand seals for Earth Tremor Sense Jutsu again to track the agent's location. At the same time, his surroundings on his right, just behind him, suddenly lit up as a bright light pierced through the mist's opaqueness. A moment later, another bright light burst a small distance from the previous one. A quick succession of bluish-white lights burst all around him. He was confused for a moment before a chill went down his spine when he felt a slight itch at the back of his nape. It was from the current in the air. He realized what the twins were trying to do. The mist reduced visibility by blocking light, but if someone lit a bright enough light, some of it was bound to travel through, because while the smoke was thick, it wasn't a blockout curtain. The twins were using some lightning release ninjutsu to illuminate their surroundings in an attempt to find him. He knew his location was found when the response from his jutsu came back. He immediately launched himself straight up into the air a second before a sword, sparking with an electric current, swung where his head had been. He jumped high to assess his situation when Red suddenly appeared right next to him in the sky with his sword buzzing with the same kinjutsu. Takuma only had the time to swing his fist to unleash a second form punch right into Red's injured shoulder. Red all but shrugged the hit off, but it managed to deviate his swing from its original path. Takuma grabbed the man, and they spun in the air before he threw the agent down towards his partner. Blue didn't bother catching his partner and stepped away, ready with his sword for Takuma to come down. Takuma threw a tag kunai at him, and because of the fog, he noticed the fluttering tag a moment too late and could only jump away at the last moment. Red, however, wasn't as lucky because while he managed to land firmly on his feet, he was blasted away by the explosion. Takuma rushed towards Red the moment he landed on the ground. Red was more injured, making him an easier target. Though before Takuma could reach his target, he had to jump away to avoid a volley of shuriken aimed at his back. Blue appeared directly above and swung his sword down. Takuma rolled to the side and kicked dirt at the agent's mask, who was quick enough to block it with his hand. But he'd successfully destroyed his rhythm. Takuma got onto his feet and felt power fill his body as his muscles contracted and relaxed in perfect rhythm. He moved right in without any hesitation and covered the distance between them in a single step. Blue, startled by Takuma's speed, skipped back while releasing a horizontal slash of his sword, channeling lightning. Takuma was much faster than he had been until then in the fight. He stopped on the sword's tip only a few centimeters before speeding right back up in the exact second, sidestepped into the swing's opposite direction and laid down a punch. Blue rolled his shoulder in a defensive move when he couldn't dodge. He felt a force hammer into his body. It rang his bones and almost brought up the food he had eaten before. A blood vessel in his nose burst and coated the inside of his mask with blood. The force then traveled down his back leg and sank his foot into the ankle level. Takuma wasn't holding back his speed or strength until then. He couldn't use it with a sword in hand. His skill with Kenjutsu simply didn't allow him to pull on all of his capabilities. Taijutsu, on the other hand, was a whole different game. Blue moved his other leg to back away, but Takuma struck it with a perfectly timed second form augmented kick, forcing the leg back to the ground. He then hit the sword hand with another second form augmented strike, throwing both his leg and hand off balance. Takuma packed the most amount of chakra he could into his arm and moved in for the kill shot. He was going to break through the rib and rupture the heart when the sound of rushing footsteps brushed his ears. He abandoned his attack and moved to the side to avoid Red's sword. It was at that moment that Takuma realized that both the agents had been using the same Kenjutsu for most of the fight. They had barely used anything else when there had been multiple moments where other ninjutsu or Kenjutsu would have been better suited for the situation. They are trying to preserve chakra. Bukijutsu were popular among shinobi because they were known to be very efficient in terms of chakra cost. Many shinobi pursued learning a weapon and jutsu associated with it because it allowed those with limited reserves to own powerful options. Kenjutsu, being a subcategory of Bukijutsu, shared its characteristics and was by far the most popular. Preserving chakra wasn't anything special and was part of combat, but the way the twins were doing it was extreme, as though they were expecting another fight after this and wanted to save as much chakra as they could. But that couldn't be it because Khan had said that they were here to kill him specifically. Now, Takuma wouldn't believe a word out of that bastard's mouth, but he had no reason to lie right now. Which led him to consider another situation. They were going to use B-rank jutsu. Usually, keeping enough chakra for one's strongest option was common sense, but shinobi often fell into the trap of saving chakra to a point of detriment. They would keep saving to be ready for an uncertain situation when they could have used chakra to protect themselves better or create opportunities that could have ended the fight sooner. Those who believed in hoarding chakra until the end were the farthest from the efficient chakra users. He didn't think root agents would have tendencies like that. So, it could mean one other thing. The twins were looking for an opportunity where they could nail him with something so strong that he would have a 0% chance of surviving it, like a B-rank combination ninjutsu. Looking at their behavior, he would not have found it strange if one of them was aggressively preserving chakra while the other worked to create an opportunity, but seeing both of them acting like penny pinchers only granted his theory further credence. And it was at that point when the temperature began to rise, causing the droplets suspended in the form of mist to return to vapor, clearing up the surroundings. Takuma glanced at Blue, who was holding up his arms with heat distortions around his hands. It was a cheap D-rank utility jutsu. Takuma clicked his tongue. If he had pushed more chakra into the jutsu, he could have made the jutsu more resistant to being countered using heat. He reminded himself to train that type of nature and shape manipulation to make his mist more resistant. It's coming, he thought. If they had a way to disperse the mist, they would have done it right at the beginning. Not doing so told him that they thought that taking him in the mist was plausible, but now that it had failed, they were getting rid of the mist. It was clear to him now. The next attack was going to be the final one, and if they were going to pull out their big gun, he was going to do so as well. Chapter 427, Takuma and the twin agents gazed at each other. It was from experience that both sides intuited that they had reached a critical point in the fight. They had already observed and probed each other and tested a few strategies to finish the job. Thus, the tactics were laid and the field was set. Whatever happened next would most likely decide the outcome. The twins once again separated from each other and went in opposite directions, slowly approaching him from either side to trap him with a pincer move, just like they tried to do at the start of the fight. They were going for a gradual ramp up, but he didn't give them the space to control the flow of the battle. He pulled multiple shuriken in both hands from his weapon pouches and launched them at both of them. He didn't stop and pulled out 2 tag kunai in each hand. The agents saw the tag kunai headed towards them, but they also saw Takuma weaving hand seals. Their body language instantly changed. Instead of leaping away out of the blast radius to safety, Red stepped in and swung his sword hard to deflect the kunai as far as possible before rushing towards Takuma. Blue dropped to slide on the ground to let the kunai pass over him before popping back up to his feet. The tags exploded, but Blue managed to stop himself from being thrown off balance. They correctly recognized that the two-phase projectile attack wasn't meant to damage them, but instead to buy time to complete his hand seals. A shinobi of Takuma's caliber wouldn't require time to complete a D-rank or C-rank ninjutsu because they were neither long nor required complex chakra manipulation. The same couldn't be said about B-rank jutsu. If a shinobi were interrupted while signing hand seals for a B-rank ninjutsu, they lost a substantial amount of chakra. Thus, it was common practice to get cover from teammates or do it the way Takuma had done. And thanks to the fight, his body was warm, and his pathways ready to handle a heavy, persistent flow of chakra. Earth-natured chakra flooded his system and flowed to every corner of his body. The feeling of strength a B-rank jutsu provided was intoxicating, and the sense invincibility was a universal experience for those who could use B-rank jutsu. Earth Release, Earth Spear. As Takuma's body darkened, Blue slashed at his legs, but he jumped above the blade. Red arrived the very next second and brought his sword down, but by then, the jutsu finally set in. Takuma raised his arm and met the lightning-wreathed sword. Even though Earth was weak against lightning, the rank barrier was still substantial. He poured more chakra into his arm, just to be safe, and blocked the sword's stun effect from taking effect. But instead of counterattacking immediately, he pretended to be weak by stumbling back. Blue went in for a stab but was immediately yanked to safety by his collar thanks to Red. Takuma's fist brushed past his nose. The wind displaced by the arm blew his hair and clothes back like he was standing in front of an industrial fan. His jaw would have undoubtedly shattered if he had been hit by that. Takuma glared at Red, who had seen through his ruse. The agents' coordination made their teamwork greater than the sum of its parts. They wouldn't have been nearly as much trouble if he had fought them individually. He dropped to one knee and raised his arms above his head before smashing them down to the ground. The moment the agents saw his arms glow, they tried to escape to no avail. From the point of impact, the earth itself fractured. Cracks and fissures raced out in every direction faster than the eyes could follow, destroying any kind of footing they could find. Stone and soil heaved up and down in deep crests like a violent wave. The earth's starving maw opened up, swallowing the hungry terrain, and in their attempts to escape, the agents were dragged off their feet and pulled into the flow. Red fell up to his chest. As he tried to get out, Blue suddenly rushed in front of him instead of helping him out. The reason? Takuma was already upon them with a glowing fist. Blue swung his sword at the incoming fist. Ninjutsu-enhanced fist met Kenjutsu-empowered sword. The blade snapped at the point of impact, with the broken piece carving a gash into Blue's mask before zipping through the sky. Takuma's other fist was already glowing. With Earth Spear, he didn't need to be as careful as he usually was about how much chakra he was putting in his arm and could use augmentation quicker than normal. The moment the chakra was under his control, he swung. Go left! Red's voice made Blue move to the side without a single thought about what he was doing. That's how much trust they had in each other. Behind Blue, Red had already finished signing hand seals and unleashed the electro ball he had used before against the clone. The augmented fist clashed with the C-rank lightning release ninjutsu, triggering an explosion that cracked the ground around their feet even further and stirred up a large amount of dust. Red, enduring the impact, crawled out of the crevice he had fallen into. He was about to move away, but a hand shot out of the dust and grabbed him by the neck, stifling all access to air. The next moment, an almost solid blue fist struck him in the abdomen as Takuma emerged from the dust. With his neck held in an iron grip, Red couldn't even groan and grunt in pain. However, a mouthful of blood jettisoned out of his mouth and stained the inside of his mask. The pain made his head grow heavy. Takuma's fist began to glow as he went in for a second punch, but Blue kicked him in the head. It didn't hurt, but he couldn't stop himself from being moved away, which loosened his grip enough that Red managed to escape. Blue moved quickly and slapped a tag between Takuma's shoulder blades. Red coughed blood as he tried to catch his breath, but managed to throw a tag kunai right at his feet. Both of the agents jumped away just as the short detonation explosive tags blew up. Straight-faced. Prepare for the B1 combination, Red said between coughs. Both of them immediately began to weave hand seals. Blue kept an eye on Red to match his hand seals and chakra manipulation with his injured partner, as they had to be perfect in their coordination to combine their B-rank ninjutsu successfully. Their two ninjutsu didn't exist in any jutsu library and were specially created for them for the sole purpose of creating a perfect B-rank combination ninjutsu. The moment the twins had become Chunin, they had worked with a retired Hidden Leaf Jonin, an expert in lightning release, for years to create two custom ninjutsu with perfect synergy. Red's lightning release, Thunder God's Fong. Blue's lightning release, Blue Thread of Death. Thunder God's Fong was a rod of pure lightning chakra that had the capability of penetrating even the most impenetrable of defenses because it concentrated all of its power into a thin rod, composed of extremely excitable chakra. The jutsu was among the most devastating single-target offensive B-rank ninjutsu out there. As the name suggested, Blue Thread of Death launched a thread made from pure lightning chakra. Said thread would be attached to the target with a needle end that digs into the body until it finds a nerve. Once attached, the thread was extremely difficult to detach. The user would then pour lightning-natured chakra through the thread, frying everything even vaguely close to the nerve. It was also a special ninjutsu whose damage was entirely dependent on how much chakra the user poured into the jutsu. There were diminishing returns, but it nevertheless caused lethal damage. But when those two jutsu were combined, their result was something entirely else. Thunder God's Fong would ride the blue thread of death attached to the target and would never miss unless the target managed to remove the thread. On its way, the lightning rod would absorb the chakra poured into the thread and become enormously powerful. As they were 3/4 of the way through their casting, the target rushed out of the dust and headed straight towards Blue. It only took a second for Blue to realize that he wouldn't be able to complete his jutsu. Even if he moved back, he wouldn't be able to complete his hand seals and chakra manipulation in time. He had to think about the backup plan. Lightning release was stronger against earth release. He recognized the earth release ninjutsu and knew that it wasn't a purely defensive ninjutsu, which meant Red's purely offensive ninjutsu could very well kill him or bring him to a state where he would be easily killed afterwards. He just needed to ensure the ninjutsu would hit the target. He continued to weave hand seals until the last moment, and when the target was in range with his shimmering blue fist, he dodged to the right, but got hit on the shoulder. Even before the pain hit, he knew that his shoulder was beyond shattered, along with other problems like torn muscles. Any hope he had of maintaining his chakra was crushed, but his job wasn't done. He gritted his teeth to endure the pain and jumped on the target to take him down to the ground. He failed as the target managed to stop himself on one knee, but it was enough as Red completed his hand seals. Chakra poured out of Red's body and coagulated into a long rod above his shoulder. It was a perfect thin cylinder that shone in crystal blue and didn't leak any electric currents or arcs. Everything was perfectly contained inside the rod's body. The twins shared a look. There was no need to exchange any words because they knew their mission. The assassination was classified as a suicide mission for them, which meant they had to complete it even if it meant they died doing it. Sacrificing oneself for the success of the mission was the greatest honor a root agent could do. If he clung to the target, he too would be affected by Thunder God's Fong. Blue used his good arm and leg to trap the target to the ground, and got punched in the chest for it. It wasn't as bad as the previous one, but he felt his ribs break, and he clung on as the light in his vision began to dim. "Do it," he said, but his voice only managed to muster a whisper. Red threw the rod the moment the target shoved him, and Blue knew he had done his part and was about to close his eye when he felt a tug and was suddenly in front of the target. No, he thought in horror as he felt the lightning rod hit him in the back. Straight-faced. Fuck, Takuma thought as he found himself in a bad spot. Everything was going well until Blue grabbed onto him, and he couldn't push him away in time. Now he had a lightning-fast B-rank jutsu coming at him. The moment he saw the rod towards him, he knew that his life was in danger. Earth Release was weak against Lightning Release. Earth Spear wasn't going to fare well against the agent's jutsu. He didn't even have time to execute the jutsu, unlike the last time he faced a B-rank jutsu. As the rod neared, he knew he only had one option. Brute force his defense. If there was one advantage he had over most people, it was his chakra reserves. Not once in his life had he run out of chakra during a fight. He was in a fortuitous situation where he could use multiple B-rank jutsu in the same fight, both of which weren't learned by people because of their chakra-hungry nature, even among other jutsu of the same rank. And even now, he was nowhere near bottoming out, so Takuma was going to let Earth Spear drink as much as it wanted to stay alive. But he had a problem to solve before that. Red's jutsu looked like a rod which told him that it was likely meant to pierce his body. He could tell from the jutsu's defined shape that the power was concentrated and that it would go through him before wrecking his body with lightning. No amount of chakra would allow Earth Spear to stop him from being skewered. Even if he had time, he would have been scared to punch it because if his chakra augmentation wasn't powerful enough, the rod would go through his arm and cripple it completely, ruining his life as a shinobi forever. His only choice was to grab the rod with both hands to prevent it from going through him. He didn't know what that would do to his hands, but it was better than just dying. All he could do was to pour as much chakra into his hands. But as he pushed the agent away, an epiphany struck him. He grabbed the agent back and shoved forward as quickly as possible, hoping the rod would hit the agent and stop there. There wasn't even time to pray as the rod went through the agent, stopping an inch away from his body. Alas, he didn't have the time to breathe a sigh of relief because a factory load of lightning assaulted him, traveling into his body from his hand that was holding Blue up in front of him as it contracted and seized up in place from the current assaulting his nerves. Straight-faced. Red fell to his knees from exhaustion as his vision doubled up and blurred. His head was turning so much that it was difficult to hold a thought, even after witnessing his jutsu pierce the closest person to him in his entire life. He was experiencing symptoms of using excessive chakra in a short amount of time, combined with low chakra levels, made worse by his injuries. He couldn't raise his head or focus his vision and fell over from flinching upon hearing the ear-piercing scream. He knew it wasn't from his partner, which could only mean that he was already dead. The target continued to scream for a few more seconds before everything went silent. Red gripped the loose soil and tried to focus. He had to confirm that the target was dead. He still had chakra, so he knew it would take a few more seconds for him to regain his condition and move. In truth, he wanted to hurry to say farewell to his partner before the death seal burned his body to ash. Red closed his eyes when he heard footsteps and knew that his wish wouldn't come true. He weakly looked up and saw the target walking towards him. The teen shinobi's entire body was shaking and trembling as remnants of the jutsu stuck to him. The jutsu he was using was gone, returning his skin to its normal color, except now, it was shades paler than before. His face, which seemed to be set in stone, twitched involuntarily. Red had managed to do a lot of damage, but it wasn't enough as the target was still alive. His focus had almost returned, and he thought about fighting, but when he thought about his dead partner, he just couldn't bring himself to care. "I'll lay me down beside my brother when this is over," Red said just before the target kicked him in his face. Straight-faced. Takuma fulfilled the agent's last wishes with great difficulty. He gazed at his fingers, he could barely muster any power in his hands. He had to stomp Red to death because of it. Takuma was lucky. Even though the lightning release jutsu had got him in the end, he only bore half its wrath, the other half being shouldered by Blue. For the first time, he truly realized how lethal B-rank jutsu were. Even half of it would have killed him if Earth Spear hadn't been working overtime to protect him, and even then, he didn't come out unscathed. The only thing keeping him standing was that he had things to finish. Takuma turned around and began walking in Khan's direction. It was time to end things. Chapter 428, Khan wheezed in pain as he hobbled his way through the field with a bloody hand on his aching belly. He had a trail of blood going down from the edges of his lips, and the simple act of swallowing blood and saliva felt akin to downing needles because of his bruised throat. He almost fell over when he heard the thunderous roar of the lightning release ninjutsu. He didn't dare look back and tried to hurry his steps. He hoped that the Gemini brothers had used their B-rank combination ninjutsu to kill Takuma. He didn't think they would need to use their final weapon against someone like Takuma. The Gemini brothers had an impressive 100% success rate and were among Lord Danzo's favorite agents when he wanted something done. So, then why was he hurrying? Because he was afraid. Khan closed his eyes when he heard approaching footsteps behind him. It seemed that the Gemini brothers weren't enough. A part of him hoped that maybe the footsteps belonged to one of the brothers, but that hope was crushed by a boot to his back. He tripped to the ground, and his stomach lurched in agony as he was kicked to make him face upwards. And there stood Takuma, staring down at him with a sword in hand and the sun shining behind him, casting a shadow on him. His hand was trembling like a fawn's legs, and it looked like it was taking everything in his power to maintain the grip. "You must think you're so great," Khan said with a bitterness so strong that it took away the pain. "Do you think you're safe because you survived this?" he scoffed. "Get used to looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life because Lord Danzo will have his eye on you. Then I'd better live a long life. Saves me the trouble of going out seeking your kind if you willingly come to me," Takuma said. Khan felt his blood boil when he heard the nonchalant voice. He gritted his teeth before screaming, "You ruined my life, you bastard. You're going to die, but before that, we will kill everyone you hold dear. That fucking old man you live with must love being a shinobi at his age, then he's going to die on the field as a shinobi." The sword blade glinted in the sun as Takuma stabbed Khan's good arm just below the elbow, pinning it to the ground. Khan's screams filled the practice field. The screams devolved into broken cries as he painfully shifted his torso and dug his heels into the ground, but the sword forced him to stay put. Takuma, who hadn't removed his eyes from Khan, turned his head to the side and stared into nothing as though there was something only he could see. After a moment, he returned his gaze to Khan and asked, "Do you remember me?" Khan didn't reply and continued to sob. His empty shoulder moved up like he was trying to reach the sword with the hand and arm that was no longer there. Takuma looked to the side once more. "Project Sprig. I'm Runt. Don't you remember me?" Khan stopped sobbing and looked up at him with an utterly stunned expression. What did you say?" he asked. Not in 100 years did he expect to hear something from his past here. Project Sprig. It had been a decade since he last heard about the Root project he was part of. Not only was it a complete failure, but it was also shut down after ANBU discovered its existence. He barely managed to escape the aftermath unscathed. Before you, it was the greatest stain on his record. "It's me. Don't you remember?" Runt. It was an informal name he had given to one of the test subjects. The child was named so because of his small size and light weight. Despite his size, he was among the longest surviving test subjects, showing an astounding resilience that had caught the interest of the head scientists who wanted to see how much the child could handle. But didn't that child die? Khan had ordered the elimination of all the test subjects. Then how? He could only think of one reason. Someone had screwed up and not done their job properly. Everyone was stressed that day because they had been informed that the ANBU would raid them in a few hours. How? Khan asked, completely baffled. "I survived," Takuma said as he stepped forward until he was standing over Khan before dropping to his knees. One of the knees landed right over the good arm that was already pinned down by the sword. Khan screamed in agony as the sharp sword cut his muscle and the edge ground against his bone. "But that's not why you're dying today." Takuma wrapped his shaking hands around Khan's neck and began squeezing. "You're dying for daring to harm this village. For sending assassins after me. For killing my friend." The grip was embarrassingly weak for a shinobi, but as he spoke, it began to tighten. Her name was Riku. Remember it. She had the rest of her life ahead of her. You, on the other hand, are way past your expiry date. Khan's already bruised throat began to close up as Takuma's trembling hands tightened, while they began shaking even more from the sheer effort he was putting into pushing past his injuries, fueled purely by the hatred Takuma had for Khan. Every day you live is an affront to her memory. It's a mistake made by this world, but don't you worry, I'll fix it in the world's stead. Khan stared at the rage-filled eyes and the face that was twisted by hate, glaring down at him. Would he have thought, all those years ago, when he sent 4 trainees on a mission he considered easy, that his life would change? That his life had crashed into someone who just refused to die and became a bigger nuisance every time they met. And now he was being told that they knew each other from much further past. Was this fate? Go on to wherever's next. I'll do you a favor by giving you peace because if I had my way, peace would have been a dream for you. He didn't want to die. There was so much more he wanted to do. He wished to see Roots return to the Hidden Leaf. Seeing Lord Danzo become the Hokage. Joining him in his plan to take over the Land of Fire. Showing the other villages and the world that they were superior and teaching them to bow to greatness. He wanted to be part of that future. And with those thoughts, the life of a Root agent came to an end. Straight-faced. ANBU Lieutenant Barbary gazed at the cremated remains of 2 Root agents lying in the middle of the field. An Irionin and Fuanin operative sifted through the remains, careful not to disturb them. So? Barbary asked. These remains match those usually observed with Death Seal ignitions, said the Fuanin. He looked at the Irionin who nodded as well. We can confidently confirm that these remains were cremated by a Death Seal. Barbary nodded and then exited the white tent that had been erected around the remains to protect them from being disturbed. The entire field was busy with ANBU running around to secure the location. Root agents infiltrating the village to assassinate an ANBU operative, one that is currently the lead expert in Root-related matters, was a huge deal. The fact that their informant network had no idea, and there was no chatter, made the matter worse because it meant that Root took extreme precautions to ensure that the mission was successful. However, they ended up failing. Barbary gazed around the shattered training field. There were so many crevices and shallow ravines that barely any flat surface remained on this side of the practice field. Burnt ground from explosive tags and signs of destruction, which, according to someone in the know-how, were made from strong lightning-release ninjutsu. And the presence of B-rank ninjutsu. Another proof that Root wanted the assassination to be successful, regardless of the consequences. Even the location was carefully chosen to be a training field where no one would suspect the cause behind a commotion. Barbary made his way to the other side of the field, where a larger tent was set up. He looked inside and saw Rael lying on a bed with Irionin around him. His life wasn't in danger, but he had suffered significant injuries. It was a miracle that he had managed to alert them about the situation and then stay awake until they managed to reach him. Lieutenant Barbary. He walked to the 2 ANBU captains who had come after being informed of the situation. ANBU captains were busy people with packed schedules. The situation had to be serious for them to break away from their responsibilities. He greeted them. Takanid and Weasel. Rael was leading Takanid's umbrella for Weasel's. Even though the decision was final and things were already in the works in the background, the transition hadn't been made official. Thus, both of the captains had come when they heard that their operative had survived an assassination attempt. He was wearing custom tactical gear, Weasel said as he gazed inside the tent. He was expecting something. Who was he meeting here? Chunin Inomoto. An old acquaintance, Barbary answered. He had talked to Takuma upon arrival. However, it seemed that it was a ploy by Root to lure Rael here. We are searching for Inomoto. He's missing, but we suspect that he's already dead. What was their relationship for Rael to show up fully geared? Asked Takanid. Inomoto was Rael's referrer when he joined the ring as a prizefighter. They didn't part on amicable terms, Barbary replied. He didn't mention that Inomoto was connected to the drug trade and that Rael ran the narcotics task force at the police force. Though there was no concrete proof, anyone with a brain would see that there was something there. According to Rael, the third agent went by the name Khan. They met before, when Rael was deployed in the Steamfrost War. And this agent is also suspected to be involved in the last attempt at Rael's life. Barbary continued his report. The other two agents had identical personas, everything from gear to mask, the only difference was the color of their masks. The Gemini brothers, Weasel suddenly said. You know them? Asked Taijutsu. The youngest captain in ANBU history nodded. I've heard about them before. Danzo must really want him dead to send those two so near the village. I heard something about a barrier, Taijutsu asked. According to Rael, there was a barrier of unknown characteristics around the practice field, which went down soon after the fight. They didn't come after him, so it's safe to assume they escaped, Barbary replied. Were they agents? It's hard to say. Taijutsu and Weasel exchanged looks. This wasn't looking good. A breach this big didn't look good on ANBU. It questioned their competency. If they couldn't protect one of their own, how were they supposed to guard the village and the nation at large? Things were made worse when the perpetrator was homegrown right in Hidden Leaf's bows. As they were talking, Kestrel stepped out from the tent. Boss. Rael is asking to leave, she said awkwardly. Straight-faced. Takuma's request was rejected. Even before Barbary or the captains could say anything. Campbell denied his request in his face with no further discussion, and he was shipped off to a hospital where a top team of Irionin looked after him for the next 24 hours. Thankfully, they allowed him a phone call, which he used to inform Maraboshi that he was fine, but wouldn't be able to come home. It felt like he had many questions, but he only asked if he was in good health. Takuma didn't lie to him and revealed that he was injured, but immediately added that he was already in a hospital. Maraboshi, of course, wanted to visit, but ANBU didn't allow him visitors for the time being. Fortunately, the Irionin discharged him after a day of observation. They wanted to keep him for another day or two, but he managed to persuade them to release him within a day on the condition that he was to visit every day for a week to get the mandated healing sessions. Even though he was only hit by half a B-rank jutsu, it wasn't something that he could shrug off with a day in the hospital. For complete recovery with no future complications, he had to go through the full course. He promised them that he would visit and fully intended to keep it because he didn't want any future complications. The only issue is that they barred him from any significant training or chakra usage for the next week, along with no work for at least 3 days. It was a bad time to be off work because he had meetings to attend with people in the coming days. There was a lot of work to be done for the new squad he was going to be leading under Itachi. He was forced to reschedule those meetings. I'll see you tomorrow, miss, Takuma said to the nurse who had taken care of him during his one-day visit and left the hospital. The two plainclothes operatives who were standing guard outside his room followed him outside. Thank you for the hard work. You can leave now, he said to them. Our orders are to stay with you for at least the next few days, Operative Rael. We are going to escort you home, said one of them. And I can't say anything to persuade otherwise? No, the second one said bluntly. Takuma looked at both of them before sighing. All right, follow your orders, but we aren't going home. There are a couple of places I want to go before. It was time to do the thing he had wanted to do since asking to leave right after the fight. Straight-faced. The destination was a posh residential area near the center of the inner city. It was home to many of the smaller yet significant and powerful Hidden Leaf clans. Takuma stood in front of a traditional house built on a big plot of land. He turned around and addressed his bodyguards. I'm going in alone from here. It won't take long. You two should hide yourselves. His guards readily agreed. It was definitely a surprise because he fully expected them not to have any flexibility. He had an attempt on his life literally the day before, and not everyone involved was caught. But they seemed to hold respect for him because of what had happened the day before, and entertained his request as long as he didn't make their jobs difficult. Takuma walked in through the front gate and rang the bell. He wanted to do this the moment he confirmed Khan was dead when his body turned to ash. It had to be done even though it would get him in trouble with ANBU. He could have waited a few more days until the protection detail was removed, allowing him to do it without scrutiny, but he felt they needed to know as soon as possible. He didn't care if it got punished for it. The door to the house opened, and there stood Torai Kamiko, his academy classmate and teammate when they were both deployed to the Steamfrost War. Takuma? What are you doing here? He took a deep breath and pushed down the emotions that threatened to bubble over to say what he wanted to clearly. He's dead. I killed him. Chapter 429, Maraboshi. Anko was feeling the blues on Monday morning. She had so much fun drinking and dancing at the club late into the night, but now she had a work week in front of her before she could let go again. I don't want to work, she whined while getting ready for morning training. Fortunately, she had flexible work hours so she could go in a little late if she felt so. It was at that point that she smelled coffee and sauntered into the kitchen. She greeted her roommate with a good morning as she slid into a dining table chair. Soon after, she had a cup of coffee in front of her. Thank you. You make the best coffee, she grinned. You're only saying that because you're lazy, Yuhi Kurenai, a jonin of the Hidden Leaf, sighed as she sat opposite Anko. Unlike her roommate, she was ready for work and had a full meal prepared for breakfast. Anko hummed in delight as she sipped her hot coffee in anticipation of the miraculous effects of caffeine. Hey, did something happen yesterday? There was a lot of buzz at work about something, but no one really knew what exactly happened, she asked. Torture and interrogation worked closely with ANBU, so she knew they had been active in the village. She asked Kurenai because a jonin might have access to more information about the topic. I'm unaware of the details, but it was significant enough for ANBU to raise the security alert yesterday, Kurenai replied between bites. ANBU had kept things under wraps as they usually did, but some information had reached her ears through both formal and informal channels, so she knew they were taking the incident seriously. Apparently, they're going around kicking down doors of anyone who might be in the know. So, it's serious, huh? It is. As Anko was about to finish her coffee, the front doorbell chimed. They looked at each other, not expecting anyone this early in the morning. Their house help, who was responsible for cooking and cleaning, didn't arrive until a few more hours. I'll go look, Anko said as she gulped down her remaining coffee. She opened the door and was pleasantly surprised to see Takuma standing in front of her home. What are you doing here this early in the morning? What would you have done if you had disturbed my sleep? I get cranky, you know. As she joked, she noticed that Takuma was a little pale. Her eyes roamed over her body. At first look, nothing stood out to him, but she felt like he was leaning on one side, not unusual for a civilian, but for a shinobi of Takuma's level, it felt off. Before he could say something, she not so gently hit him in the side, causing his face to twist in pain with a groan. You're injured. Something happened, a tough mission? I told you about your combat style, didn't I? Trading too much damage will wreck you someday. Focus on protecting yourself, she said, frowning in worry. Takuma sighed with a helpless smile. It's so difficult to get a word in edgewise. He's not a salesman. Let him in first, Kurenai said from inside. Anko invited him inside. It was his first time visiting her home, which was why the impromptu visit was so much more surprising. Sorry to disturb you so early in the day at your home, Jonin Kurenai, said Takuma, bowing to the jonin. Nonsense, it's her home as well, and you're a guest. I'm happy to see you, Chunin Takuma. I have heard a lot about you from Anko, Kurenai said before she turned her unique red eyes to her roommate. You already make a positive impression by not being a random man she picked up at a bar or club. Anko rolled her eyes and ignored her friend. You want some coffee? She asked and pointed him to the dining table. I was wondering if you could talk alone, Takuma said with a faint smile. Anko narrowed her eyes, glancing at where she had hit him before. She wondered if this had something to do with his condition. She and Kurenai lived in a spacious 3-bedroom apartment, owing to their considerable income as chunin and jonin, respectively. She led him to the living room where they sat across from each other on couches. "It's not good news, is it?" she frowned. "It's good news," Takuma said with a small smile. He took a deep breath before looking right into the eyes. "The bastard who killed Riku is dead." Anko almost responded on instinct, but her words died on her tongue as memories flashed past her eyes, and the most painful of them were of the taciturn girl who only said what was on her mind without hesitation. Once every week, the thoughts of regret would visit her. Riku had died without Anko being able to anything to help her. It would have been one thing if she had failed, but to not even given a chance. "How?" "I killed him, so I can confirm that he truly is dead," Takuma said with clenched fist, but with a melancholic expression. She could tell he was thinking about Riku. Even though he had taken revenge, it wasn't going to bring her back. Anko wasn't surprised that Takuma had killed Riku's murderer, but it was something she could imagine. In some ways, he was the most affected by it because he was there, and Riku jumped in to protect him. "Huh, but wasn't he from Root?" she asked. Takuma nodded. "Then how?" "I can't tell you that, but he's dead and that's all that matters," Takuma said, and then turned his head away to avoid eye contact as though he didn't want to lie to her, so he was avoiding the conversation. Anko was going to respect his wishes, but then a flash hit her head, and the disconnected pieces in her mind fell into place. A dead Root agent, ANBU raising the village's security alert level, Takuma showing up the very next day injured, and his unwillingness to talk about the details. Takuma was an ANBU. It made so much sense that it was absurd. It also answered her question on how he managed to find a Root agent. She sighed, looking at her former teammate and war buddy. Had he joined ANBU to seek revenge on Root? If so, she didn't want him to live his life in pursuit of revenge. But from what she saw from his body language, he was relaxed as though some burden had been lifted from his shoulders. After some thought, she theorized that while revenge was a part of his motivation, it wasn't just that. "Did you tell Kamiko?" she asked. "I went to her first. She was closer to Riku than any of us ever were," Takuma said with a sigh. "The team, except Takuma, spent their entire time together in you." Riku and Kamiko had grown closer in that time. She didn't express it outwardly, but everyone could sense that Kamiko was affected by Riku's death. "She thinks she could have stopped Riku from going back into the mansion," said Takuma, his face etched with gloom. "But the only reason she went in there was because of me." "Don't insult her choice," Anko said. "What happened that day wasn't an accident. She went in there because she cared about you. Blaming yourself devalues her decision. She was a brave kunoichi who protected her teammate on the battlefield. The only thing you should do is to honor her sacrifice. Losing someone wasn't easy. It was a nightmare if someone thought that it was their fault." Everyone in the team felt some level of responsibility for Riku's death, but the one who felt it the most was probably Takuma. She could tell that while taking revenge on her killer had helped, it hadn't absolved him of his guilt, most probably nothing ever would. What he needed right now was to learn to live with it. "What's with the stationery?" she asked, pointing to the plastic bag with paper, pen, envelope, and stamps in it. "Daiki and Iori." "Need to tell them as well," Takuma muttered. "Somehow, the idea of writing a letter to tell them feels more difficult than telling both of you in person. What am I supposed to write to them?" "Tell them what you told us, and then tell them about how you're doing. They'll be glad to know that Riku's killer is dead, but I think they'll be happier to know how their friend is doing," Anko said. The dead were going to remain so, there was nothing one could do about it, but the living were still within reach. She gazed at the boy in front of her. People steeped in the desire for revenge often forgot about that simple fact. They thought that because they cared about the dead so much, everyone else did as well. "It'd be good to know how they're doing," Takuma said, smiling faintly. "It would be. So, let me write one too. We'll get Kamiko to write one as well." "Let's send them together," Anko said with a smile. Straight-faced. Itachi sat in his office with an ANBU standing in front of his table. He visited Taijutsu Kamiko and Mitarashi Anko. Both of them were on Rael's team when he was deployed at the Steamfrost War. The operative reported Takuma's movements after he left the hospital. Between the visits, he bought stationery and stamps for letters. As for why he visited them, it's still unknown. Itachi gazed at the files of the two people mentioned. Takuma had asked to leave the moment he was in walking, barely, condition. He guessed he wanted to meet these two as soon as possible. The operative in front of him didn't know the identities of the root agents that Takuma had killed the day before. If he had known, he would have understood why Takuma went to see them before heading home. Root agent known by the name Khan. The agent who had tried to kill Takuma on multiple occasions. He had also killed one of Takuma's war buddies. If Takuma had joined ANBU for the career prospects, then Khan was the reason he targeted Root. Itachi was sure that the dead agent was the sole reason Takuma's work bordered on obsession. Itachi had to acknowledge the irony that while Takuma was working so hard to one day catch Khan, the man had come to him on his own accord. But he also had to be thankful to the agent. Because of him, ANBU got Rael, who was soon going to work under him. I suspect that the visits and the letters have something to do with the Root assassination attempt. I would recommend that we bring all the involved parties in to contain the leak of information. Scrub the record. Itachi looked up at the operative and ordered, instruct his security detail to omit the details of his movements from the time he left the hospital and arrived at his home from their reports. I will personally approve their reports into the record. Tell them if anyone, for any reason, asks, they should tell that Rael went straight home. Yes, sir, the operative obliged, but there was a hesitation. What is it? Itachi asked. May I ask why? The operative asked. For ANBU, records were deemed sacred. In a place of spies and con men, the written word was the only thing that could be trusted. One thing they taught every agent and staff was to never lie on their reports because it was the only way to piece together the truth in the often messy and complicated situations ANBU dealt with. ANBU understood that operatives often had to do things that would get them into trouble, but the authority given to them allowed their actions, which was why everyone, even if they exaggerated, understated, or dressed up the facts, always told the truth. Operatives also knew that no one outside would ever read those files because such was the existence of ANBU. The people at the top maintained and enforced the practice, leading the people at the bottom to do the same. So omitting something from the record was a serious ask, even for the two ANBU commanders, much less the captains. Because some things just need to be done regardless of the rules. Chapter 430, in his quaint house on the outskirts of the village, silently taken over by Root, Danzo read the information set by his agents undercover in the Hidden Leaf village. Because it wasn't a scheduled routine report, the contents were short and to the point. The assassination had failed. The village raised its security level. ANBU was on the prowl. The Gemini twins are dead. Danzo's tone was no different than usual, but the three high-ranking agents in the room with him knew that he was less than pleased. He closed his eyes, feeling a bubbling anger he hadn't felt in ages. Root wasn't a big entity, it never was, even during its height of power. Their main method of influence was to use Hidden Leaf's power to pull strings from the shadows. It always relied on setting up and manipulating pre-existing players on the board for a favorable outcome. He trained agents because there were things that could only be accomplished on the field, and Root needed loyal soldiers who wouldn't doubt his orders or tattle to the ANBU commanders or the Hokage just because their work was a little dirtier than what they usually did. Out of everything Root did, training agents was by far the most difficult and time-consuming task. Only a handful of trainees had the potential to succeed, something that was difficult to quantify, leading to a relatively low return on investment. Even with the substantial resources at hand, they could only work on so many trainees because ANBU always stood in their way. Both ANBU commanders were vehemently dedicated to limiting Root's growth. Now that they were free of ANBU's opposition, they no longer had the resources to grow rapidly. And just when they were at their lowest, one man killed several successful investments. Any shinobi village, much less Root, had difficulty creating and nurturing Jonin, which made agents like Gemini Brothers, two shinobi who could produce a pseudo-A rank output through combination ninjutsu, so priceless. They were such a success that he had been trying to recreate them in successive batches of trainees without much favorable results. Chunin Takuma of the Hidden Leaf. Leaf ANBU's Rael. Danzo had sent the Gemini brothers after the growing threat and ordered them to kill him at all costs because he could kill it in his old bones. At this moment, there was no one more concerning in the Hidden Leaf than Takuma. Jonin Uchiha Itachi, driven by his personal grudge over Uchiha Shirsui's death or the Uchiha clan, due to their claim of bloodline theft, were much more powerful and dangerous, but neither of them was solely focused on Root. The youngest ANBU captain had other responsibilities demanding his attention, and the founder clan wasn't allowed participation as that lay in the hands of ANBU. It wasn't difficult to discover that ANBU had formed an anti-Root initiative under Captain Weasel and Fox, and about the rising star Rael, who had shown impressive results against Root. He didn't fear Takuma for his combat strength, but for the ability he had shown in the police force and the Steamfrost War. He had formed the Narcotics Task Force against the village's drug trade and showed impressive results, and was now trying to do the same in ANBU. Danzo didn't need eyes in ANBU to guess that Takuma had Itachi's support. He was aware of their connection via Uchiha Mikoto, and knew the better Takuma succeeded, the more departmental resources he would receive to be directly used against Root. He couldn't allow the ANBU efforts against him to gain traction, which was why Takuma's elimination was necessary. By now, those participating in the anti-Root initiative would have seen and heard about the benefits given to Takuma. However, if he were to be gone for some reason, others would vie for his position, seeking the benefits, which would create internal friction and distract them from their goal. That was Danzo's goal. But it failed. The Gemini brothers were dead, and the target remained alive. He could hope that Takuma was perhaps crippled, but working with the worst-case scenario was more prudent. Order the agents to keep an eye on the target but maintain their distance, Danzo said with much displeasure. He didn't want to admit it, but they had lost too much. If the Gemini brothers had failed, then he didn't think he could send someone who wasn't a Jonin, and he didn't want to risk sending one into the village, which was the only place where they could feasibly track him down. And if the threat was to stay alive, then Danzo needed to plan around Takuma as they moved forward. Straight-faced. By the time Takuma returned home, it was already noon. He entered the quiet house and walked directly to the backyard to find Maraboshi working on his garden crops. The old shinobi heard him coming. He turned around to look at him. There wasn't any worry on his face, but the way his gaze swept over his body told Takuma that he had been worried. "I'm back," said Takuma. "Welcome home." Maraboshi's crow's feet deepened as he smiled. "How was the meeting with your disliked acquaintance?" "He didn't make it," Takuma replied as he sat on the outside veranda with a groan. "Though someone else showed up. Riku's killer. He's dead now." Maraboshi blinked in surprise at the utterly unexpected reveal. He dropped his garden shears and sat down beside him. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "I feel light," Takuma said after a moment of thought. "I guess it's because I took my revenge? I avenged Riku's death. It's funny, isn't it? I was working hard to find him one day, and the bastard came to me all confident, but I'm glad that he found me. At first, I was happy because I was getting to kill him so quickly, but then I couldn't sleep quickly at night, so I fell into thought and wondered what Riku would think about it all. She must have been happy that it all ended quickly. She would not have been happy if I spent my years fixating on that worthless bastard when there's so much more out there." Maraboshi smiled faintly when he saw Takuma trying to smile, but his eyes were brimming with tears. All he could do was gently pat his back and let the emotions that came up on returning home run their course. "I've put you in danger," Takuma said after a while. "How so?" "They mentioned you, tried to threaten me by saying that they will kill you." Maraboshi smiled. "You don't need to worry about me. I'm old and I've seen my fair share. I'll be able to handle whatever they throw at you." "Are you bragging right now?" Takuma laughed. "Ah, I almost forgot. They assigned a security detail to me. I guess they'll be hanging around for a few days. I know it's probably going to be uncomfortable, but we'll have to bear through it. So that means you'll be resting for at least the next few days? That's very good, Maraboshi said, taking away something entirely else from his statement. Takuma knew that he worked too much, and he considered himself to be thick-skinned because people consistently threw that fact to his face, but even he felt embarrassed to hear that only injury and bad health were the only ways to stop him from working, even though it was mostly true. But I don't think it's going to be all rest, Takuma sighed. What do you mean? It's not over yet. In fact, it's about to get really messy. Straight-faced. The very next day, Takuma asked Maraboshi to step out for a couple of hours. The owner of the house was more than happy to spend a day fishing and eating seafood, and left the house at sunrise. An hour after breakfast, Takuma's guest arrived in the form of 2 ANBU captains and a lieutenant. Since they were outside the ANBU premises, the operatives were in robes and masked up, making it a strange scene in what was usually a mundane living room. I'm not going to bother with hostly duties, Takuma said as he sat down around the small table along with Weasel, Takanid, and Barbary. He had only called Barbary, but he didn't think the 2 captains would show up as well. It seems ANBU was taking everything related to him pretty seriously. Let's get straight to the point, then, said Itachi, codenamed Weasel. I think the identities of Captain Takanid's Inquisitor unit are in jeopardy, Takuma said bluntly. What do you mean? Asked Senpachi, codenamed Takanid, with a frown in his voice. It should be obvious that if Root tried to kill me, they would have observed me first. They used an acquaintance, who they knew would not only cooperate with, but who also holds enough sway to make me go wherever they wanted. And they definitely did their research. If they physically followed me for as little as a week, they would know about the Ironwood Protection Company. For assassinations, a person's schedule was important. The assassins had to determine the location that would work best for them. For most people, their home and place of work were often the most visited places, and assassins would often choose a spot somewhere between them. In Takuma's case, his place work was disqualified because it was full of ANBU, and at home, they would have to deal with Maraboshi. And given that Takuma had given him the slip and despite being ambushed in hostile territory, Khan must not have felt confident attacking him somewhere in between those 2 places. But to finalize the training field as the location, Root would have still needed to do their due diligence to reach that conclusion. You are there nearly every day, Barbary said, nodding. And they knew I was an ANBU nin. Inomoto had used that secret as a threat, and if he knew, Root most definitely knew. They probably fed him that information. Which means, if they saw others go in and out of our building, there's an extremely high chance that they have my operatives and staff's identities, taken inside. Yes, sir, Takuma said, feeling some guilt about the situation. What does the playbook say about situations like this? The unit will be disbanded, Weasel replied. Takuma expected as much, which was why he felt especially guilty. Due to Barbary's and Campbell's leadership, the Inquisitor unit was a fantastic place to work. But now, because of the incident, all of that was at risk. No one's going to lose their job, right? Takuma asked the question that concerned him the most. We aren't going to kick competent operatives just because their identities are known. You guys are expensive to replace, Barbary chuckled. He still had a laid-back demeanor in even such a dire situation when he was directly involved. Identities were hidden to protect the operatives and to make it difficult for someone to target them from outside their work through their personal lives. It was also a way to protect ANBU from being exploited by someone via its members. If an identity leak was due to incompetence or intentional leakage, then there was a strict punishment that often involved getting kicked out, but if it was not intentional, ANBU shuffled those exposed around. In cases like honeypot schemes, the outsider party knew about the operatives' work beforehand and exploited them for access and information because of it. Blindly targeting a trained operative rarely turned out well. Will the squads be kept together? Takuma asked. We will see, Takanid said as he got up. If that's all, I'll take my leave. There's a lot of work to do. Can't let the boss man leave alone, Barbary said as he too got up. He patted Takuma on his back and walked out of the room after telling him to rest well. That left Itachi alone with him in the living room. They looked at each other for a moment in silence. Since he was wearing a mask, Takuma had no idea what his boss was thinking, so he decided to make idle chatter about work. So, will that be all or? Lord Hokage is going to visit you tomorrow. Pardon? Itachi smiled. Not that I mind this, but you better play a proper host to him. Chapter 431. After ANBU cleared out of his house, Takuma shut the door to his room behind him and pulled out the chair from his study table. Sunlight streamed through the window, creating a bright spot on the floor while gently illuminating the silent room. Come out. He closed his eyes and focused inward, where he saw a near insignificant amount of his chakra twist and move without his permission as a strange genjutsu began to take hold of him. He opened his eyes to see Gray sitting against the opposite wall. Perhaps it was just a trick of light or genjutsu, but the ghost side of the room seemed darker. Are you happy? Takuma asked. He felt relief because he had avenged Riku and killed the guy who tried to kill him multiple times, but Gray's relationship with Khan was something entirely else. I do, and maybe that's a problem, Gray said as he leaned his head back and stared at the ceiling. What does that mean? It's complicated, Gray sighed heavily. He lowered his head and stared at him. Go on, you've been waiting patiently. Ask what you want to know. They hadn't talked to each other since the time Gray had asked Takuma to kill Khan in exchange for discussing the former's past. Neither side had attempted to reach out, both of them wanted some time alone. Root, Project Sprig, Runt, Khan, you seem to have a lot of history I wasn't aware of. As far as I knew, your parents were merchants who, unfortunately, were part of the casualties during the Ninetales incident, said Takuma. Don't have any memories of my parents. That's probably a fake background to assimilate me into the society. A lot of children were made orphans on that day, Gray said with a melancholic look. You look like you have something to say. Takuma stared at him for a moment, the talk of parents making him remember his own parents, before pulling his shirt up to reveal a torso full of scars, some marks of battle, others remnants of unknown surgeries from a forgotten past. It's not that hard when you have the proper clues, I guess. You were part of some experiment conducted by Root? Takuma said. He noticed that he didn't feel any migraines. After getting punished for trying to even think about Gray's past for years, he had some complex emotions about the lack of pain. That's what I think as well. What do you mean, what you think? I was a test subject and a kid at that, they didn't have a reason to explain anything to me. Even if they did, it's not like I would have understood anything, Gray replied with a shrug. All I know, those fuckers, he paused, displeased that he had cursed, were the epitome of evil because of the vile things they did to me. He hesitated for a moment before snapping his fingers. A rush of memories flooded Takuma's head, and his face went pale as he sat silent like a statue. He felt an unbelievable thirst and hunger, which suddenly turned into a torture of oscillating hot and cold. He felt the terror of the darkness and the overwhelmingness of light. Noise made him jittery, while silence heightened anxiety. Each snippet of memory was accompanied by a torrent of volatile emotions that never let up. Not a single memory he saw had any normalcy, everything he saw seemed to be done to keep Gray on edge. Stop, stop, I get it. Takuma yelled at the stream of memories cut off, leaving only the lingering chaos from what he had already seen. Why? Why do all of that to a kid? Takuma asked with a beyond shocked expression. He saw numerous people in the memories, but not one of them showed any warmth. Instead of protecting and nurturing, they subjected an innocent life to a hell devoid of any and all compassion. Can't say. They never did succeed. Maybe it was just torture. It's possible they derived some sick pleasure from it, Gray said. He seemed desensitized and detached, but no one could truly separate themselves from such a past. As so the wall? You're lucky that my wall exists. You've already lived a pretty miserable life if I'm going to be honest. Imagine having what you saw, but a lot more, just rotting in there as well. Gray tried to lighten the mood, but everything about him seemed visibly duller and tired. Takuma didn't speak for the next couple of minutes, trying to process and sort out the chaos in his mind. He thought the wall was a threat, but it was actually the thing keeping the real at bay, which meant Gray, who was controlling the wall, needed to exist as well to control it. He felt weak as a bout of powerlessness hit his body. He felt helpless to resolve his problems. "How did you get out?" he asked, forcing him to trudge through. "Someone screwed up and I was somehow alive when ANBU arrived at the facility." Gray raised his hand to snap his fingers, but Takuma hurriedly stopped him. Gray smiled with a tinge of bitterness but nodded understandingly. "The village did its best to rehabilitate me before I was sent to the orphanage. For a moment, I had hope as well. Thought that if I became a shinobi, I would become strong enough to protect myself." Takuma would have thought that after Gray's experience, he would have stayed away from everything shinobi. Gray joined the academy at 6 years old, like everyone else. At least, he thought he was 6 years old at that time because his forged documents said so. Before joining the academy, he had spent 6 to 7 months in rehabilitation with some child specialists, and then he was moved to an orphanage for another half a year before he joined the Shinobi Academy and received his own apartment. Takuma didn't voice the implication. If Gray didn't remember his parents, then it could mean that he was part of the experiment from an extremely young age. "I'll be honest, even before I showed up and ruined our grades, you weren't doing a much better job." Even without Takuma, who had to learn everything from scratch, the previous report card still told a story of a poor student with bottom-of-the-barrel grades. "Well, forgive me, but it's difficult to focus and feel motivated when your own memories are torturing you, so go fuck," Gray erupted with emotions, but managed to catch himself quickly. He closed his eyes and pursed his lips as he internally tussled to take control of the turmoil of his feelings. "I'm sorry. That was uncalled for," Takuma apologized. Gray didn't respond to his apology. His eyes told that he wanted to move on and change the current topic of discussion. The abnormal Jinjutsu resistance. "Is that a result of the experimentation?" Takuma asked. He had done his research to find the source of his condition and had failed. Even Makoto, the Lady Uchiha, with her considerably larger reach and resources, wasn't able to find any relevant clues regarding the whys and hows of his beneficial situation. As I said, I didn't see or hear anything that would have allowed me to infer or deduce any information. What about at the academy? A teacher must have used Jinjutsu on the students as a demonstration. Did you feel anything back then? Gray thought about it before shaking his head. Curious, Takuma said. It must have been a result of your intrusion, Gray said with a frown. Could very well be just that. If it's not the body, then it's not unreasonable to assume that it was the soul. Souls were real in this world. Even without remembering much, he recalled the freaky ninjutsu that could summon souls from the afterlife to create undead. Maybe that's why neither Makoto nor I were able to find anything. Maybe it's something particular to me because of my unique circumstances. He glanced at Gray. The ghost had openly claimed that he had access to Takuma's memories, but he had carefully probed him, and Gray only had memories from his life in this world as Takuma. Gray didn't even know the existence of his memories from his previous life and world, much less have access to them. He didn't know the reason behind it, but after the discussion, he felt that his soul was involved in some way. Souls were real, but their existence wasn't widely known. In all of his time in the shinobi world, he hadn't read or found a single book or paper which discussed the concept of soul in any meaningful way. However, he had yet to search the ANBU archives on the topic. After failing to find anything, he had somewhat forgotten about souls, and well, he had been too busy to do miscellaneous research. It's nice to have some clarity on your past, Takuma said after a while. Though he didn't find the exact nature of the root experimentation, it was a start. He couldn't discount the possibility that the Jinjutsu resistance was a result of the experimentation, and whatever they had done had somehow triggered the body's temporary death. And if ANBU was involved in your rescue, there must be a record about it somewhere. If I can somehow find out, maybe we will know more about the experiment. Maybe we will find out about your parents? He paused and looked up at Gray, realizing he might have spoken carelessly. So, he continued, would you be fine with that? I'm curious, but if you don't want me to go looking, then I won't. It was clear that Gray still carried heavy trauma from his past. It was possible that his existence was the result of that trauma. Perhaps digging into it was not something he would want to do. Takuma wanted to know more about the body's past because it was akin to knowing about his medical history, and if there was something deeply wrong in there because of the extensive experimentation, but he would rather push it and make an enemy of an entity that held great power inside his mind. That would be nice to know, Gray said. His expressions, though, didn't betray his thoughts or feelings. Takuma decided to take his words at face value, but the problem was how to proceed with the relevant information. He didn't know where to look or who to ask. He also didn't want to make any noise because he was at a critical juncture in his ANBU career, and his past as a former root test subject could be used against him by claiming that he was a sleeper cell or undercover agent for Root. It would be absurd because he had damaged Root too much to be on their side, but reputation and perception were tricky things, and he didn't want to take a risk. Fortunately, he was willing to take some time. There was more he wanted to ask, like what exactly Gray was, but despite everything, they weren't that close, and he could feel that Gray's existence was a touchy topic. On that topic, if you want to know more about it, you actually have a perfect opportunity to do so, Gray said. Oh, how so? You should just ask the Hokage. I met him a couple of times before. He was there, you know, the day I was rescued. Chapter 432. Takuma looked outside the living room and saw an ANBU in the garden and the heads of 4 more regular shinobi patrolling outside the house's boundary wall. There was more security he couldn't see all around the house premises. He turned around and looked into the living room, where the Hokage and Maraboshi were chatting it up. Yesterday, he had asked his mentor to leave, but for this meeting, he wanted him to stay in the house because the most important person in the Hidden Leaf was coming to visit. It was so nerve-wracking that it took him a few hours to fall asleep the night before. Maraboshi and Hiruzen knew each other, so Takuma wanted his mentor to get the Hokage comfortable before he brought up the topic of Gray's past. Kohima's closed down last month, Maraboshi said. Hiruzen looked stunned at those words. I haven't heard that name in such a long time. Is the old woman still alive? She passed away 5 years ago. Her eldest son tried to run the shop, but it didn't work out. Maraboshi shook his head. Not surprising. He never showed any interest in the business. The younger one, on the other hand, would have been great. It's such a pity, Hiruzen sighed. The old men had been talking about things Takuma had never heard of for the past 15 minutes. Being housemates, and practically grandfather and grandson, he and Maraboshi got along perfectly well, but they still belonged to different generations. There were some things that only came up in the company of people with similar experiences. Takuma was sure they could talk about things of the past and present for hours. There weren't that many old shinobi alive in the village. How are you feeling, Rael? Asked the ANBU commander of the domestic branch. He wore a stag-style mask and a white cloak. It was their first time meeting. If not for the Hokage sitting in his home, Takuma would have been more nervous about meeting his boss's boss. He knew that the man was the Hokage's son, which was surprising to him when he first joined ANBU, but then he found out more about the position, and it made sense. The hospital provided excellent care. I'll be back to full strength in no time. Any other time, I would have assured you that ANBU would do everything in our power to pursue this matter to the end, but in your case, you're the one who handles Root, Stag said with a smile in his voice. It was a slap to the village's face, so I hope you'll continue the excellent work. I will do my best, Commander. Takuma paused for a moment. The real tragedy is Captain Takanit's Inquisitor unit. This incident destroyed a well-oiled machine. It'd be great if there's a way to salvage it. It was a risky move for a squad leader who hadn't even taken control of his team to make a request of an ANBU commander. He had no expectations of his words doing anything, but he still wanted to try, even if it meant potentially overreaching his bounds. Shuffling people around is policy to minimize the amount of information outside, but Takenit has indeed done a great job with the unit. I'm sure he, too, would agree that we should try to put some effort into it, said Stag. I'm sure he would be delighted, Takuma smiled. Fishing at a stream, surrounded by the calmness of nature, is soothing, said Maraboshi. Takuma decided to join their conversation and sat down at the table. Please don't misunderstand him. He isn't talking about taking a rod and sitting in silence. He enjoys hiking up his pants and getting his feet wet while spearfishing. It's a good way to get the stiffness out of the body, Takuma. One of these days, you'll cave and join me. Maraboshi laughed. Now, I will get out of your hair and let you gentlemen discuss work. He got up and left the room, sliding the door behind him. With all doors closed, only 3 people were left in the room. Stag started by giving them a rundown of where they were in the investigation. The person who called you to the training ground, Inomoto, we haven't been able to find him yet. We traced his movements and found his last known location to be at a private club. The trail, unfortunately, ends there because no one saw him after that. We interrogated the waiter and he told us who he was meeting with, but even that lead didn't reveal anything relevant to our matter. He's probably dead, Takuma said. Seeing that he didn't show up at the training field, they didn't have any more use for him beyond getting me to the location. I agree, but we still have to track his movements in case they lead us to some clues about Root, said Stag. Normally, an ANBU commander wouldn't be relaying that information to a squad leader, but these were unusual circumstances. This is the second time Root has tried to assassinate you for doing a good job, said Hiruzen, who sat opposite Takuma. Danger is a part of that job, but the enemy going to such lengths to target a singular agent is rare even in the ANBU circles. It must be stressful. Have you thought about changing your assignment? Stag didn't say anything, and his mask hid his face, but the slight movement of his head towards the Hokage told that he wasn't expecting those words when just a couple of minutes ago he had asked Takuma to continue with his work. Takuma didn't know what Hiruzen was probing for, but he decided to be semi-honest. I won't lie and say that it doesn't concern me. I would rather not die, but I'm not going to roll over because my work mildly inconveniences someone. Mild inconvenience, he says. Stag chuckled. Even Hiruzen smiled. And I have my reasons to stick to my current work. And what might they be? Hiruzen asked. Takuma was wondering how to broach the topic, but seeing that Hiruzen keyed it up, he decided to gather courage and just ask. Because of my past with them, Takuma said to Hiruzen, whose eyes widened a fraction. I don't remember much before I went to the orphanage, and to be honest, nor do I want to, but some things remain. I remember seeing one of the 3 agents I killed in the memories of back then. So, I know what was done to me was by Root. You were there, Lord Hokage. You came to see me on the day I was rescued. You're aware of my history, aren't you? Isn't that why you summoned me the last time? He asked. Hiruzen took a deep breath. A deep sorrow darkened his face, deepening his wrinkles. He suddenly looked older and tired. The joy he felt when talking to Maraboshi had completely vanished. I wish that you had forgotten about it, he asked. It's revenge then? I avenged Riku when I killed Khan, but that doesn't change the fact that they still want me dead. Instead of running away from the problem, I believe the only way to be safe from Root is through its complete and thorough elimination. Did Grey want revenge against Root? No, the remnant inside him was beyond that. But he still very much wanted Root's utter annihilation. Takuma remembered how he found himself in the world of shinobi. He woke up in an academy classroom in the middle of a lesson. Grey hadn't taken his own life. Even though he was miserable, he had no intention to forsake his life. He had died in the middle of a lesson on a random day. Whatever Root had done to him was the most likely suspect behind his death. Perhaps one day Grey would have won his fight against his past and become someone he could have been proud of, but he would never get that opportunity. What Grey wanted was not revenge. The 10-year-old child who had suffered too much and couldn't bear the burden of his past simply didn't want anyone else to suffer the same fate as him at their hands. The bunker experimentation Takuma had busted was proof that Root was still doing its vile experimentation. Unfortunately, he was already dead. Regardless of what Gray wanted, he was helpless to make it come true. But Takuma was still very much alive. He pulled off his shirt to reveal his scarred body, a mixture of scars gained in fights and those forced onto him in the name of experimentation. "I don't want others to go through what I had to go through," he said while momentarily glancing at the illusion of Gray standing behind the Hokage, staring at him with wide eyes. The remnant of the boy who died still existed within him. He had directly felt a fraction of what Gray felt in the hell he was forced through. He now inhabited that body and wanted to know what was wrong with it. Root killed his friend. They tried to kill him multiple times and still wanted him dead. Root would never let Hidden Leaf go, actively putting his friends, loved ones, and innocent people in danger. He, too, didn't want Root to continue their vile experimentation. There were too many reasons, but one thing was clear. Root had to go. "I'm scared of it, a black void that, I feel, could devour me, but I still want to know about my past, Lord Hokage. Who were my parents? What did Root do to me? How did I end up in their clutches? Do you have those answers?" Takuma asked. Hiruzen was crestfallen as he gazed at him and couldn't get his emotions in control quickly enough. "There was no information about your parents or how Root got hold of you," Stag said. Takuma gazed at him. He wasn't surprised because Stag hadn't raised a question or acted confused. If there were anyone who would know secrets, it would be an ANBU commander. Seeing Hiruzen didn't stop him, Stag continued, "They had destroyed everything by the time the team in charge got there. You were in very bad condition and were barely saved by the best effort of the Irionin on the field team." "Ask their name," said Gray, lowering his eyes. "If possible, I would like to thank them." "May I have their name?" Takuma asked. "She's dead," said Stag. "I'll send you the file. You can pay your respects at the memorial." I see," Takuma said, not expecting the response. Gray looked sorrowful, his side of the room dimmed. Stag continued, "ANBU was interested in the experiments Root was running, and you were the sole survivor, so we did look into it for some time, but with the destroyed records and your fragile condition, we couldn't make any headway. In the end, we could only speculate based on clues like the destroyed equipment and information gathered from the autopsy of the other test subjects we found." "You seem to know a lot about it," Takuma asked. Even if Stag was an ANBU commander, the way he talked seemed like he had studied the case in detail. Stag led on that mission as the captain. "He was the first one to go inside that day," Hiruzen replied. Gray walked around the room and stared at Stag as though trying to recognize him before shaking his head with a regretful expression. "Thank him for me," he said. "Thank you," Takuma said, deeply bowing his head to the man. "No need. That mission was a failure. They knew we were coming. If everything had gone well, we would have saved more lives," Stag said, giving an impression that he still gave himself a hard time about that particular mission. "What was the conclusion? What were they experimenting on?" Stag gazed at his torso as he replied, "From the presence, volume, and location of the scars, it's clear that they were putting your body under stress by withholding healing, otherwise, there wouldn't have been any at all. If healed quickly and properly using Iriojutsu, cuts left very minor scars that would fade away soon enough, which would have been the case in an experiment's controlled environment, and yet Takuma's body was riddled with surgical scars. The experts concluded that it was some kind of substance trial. Around that time, ANBU was funding research into healing solutions because of Irionin in hopes that we could develop a first aid solution to stabilize injuries until proper care." "Would they need a child for that?" Takuma asked. "Wouldn't a much sturdier adult be more suitable for such trials?" That was an argument against that specific conclusion, Stag nodded. They could have been testing soldier pill efficacy against injuries. Or one extreme conclusion was that they were trying to induce drastic change by injecting things that would change the subject's biology and using injury to hasten the process by forcing the weakened body to accept the foreign substances. And given that a child is still developing in all aspects, and might take well to those changes, The boy, dressed in clothes too big for him, was sickly pale with a tinge of bluish-green, had baggy eyes, and his skin seemed to hang from his skeleton. He had long, webbed fingers and his feet somewhat resembled flippers. It didn't take a genius to realize that the little kid was a victim of the experimentation that had given him some aquatic traits. The image of a sickly pale boy with bluish-green skin, baggy eyes, and webbed fingers and feet resembling flippers flashed through Takuma's mind when he heard those words, but someone voiced his thoughts before he could. "It bears some resemblance to that research facility you shut down, Rael," said Third Hokage. Chapter 433. After the Hokage and Stag left, Takuma retreated to his room. The conversation had become heavy by the end, but he didn't let up because a busy personage like the Hokage wasn't going to spend hours on a home visit. He asked a couple more questions while he had the chance. "What are you thinking?" Gray asked as he appeared on the bed while Takuma sat at his study table. "It's not going to be easy to find information about your past," he said. Root had left the village in a hurry. They couldn't take everything with them, so it was possible that any information about Gray's past would have been destroyed. Not only was ANBU's raid on the facility over a decade ago, but he also wasn't sure there would be any information about a test subject's past. "At this point, I'd be satisfied if we found medical records associated with whatever experimentation was done." Takuma wondered how many people he would have to catch and interrogate before someone with information fell into his lap. "I'll still try to find your parents," he said. I don't know if I want to find them," Gray said. Takuma gazed at him. "Worried that they might have given you up?" Gray eventually nodded. "Or perhaps you were stolen?" Takuma said, trying to console the remnant. "That's worse, isn't it? I can't imagine how they'd feel about having their child taken away from them. What would they feel if you suddenly appeared in front of them? Besides, you are me. I appreciate that you're willing to do it, but you won't be able to see them as parents, or be part of their lives, or let them in yours." Takuma had no words. Gray was right. He didn't think he would be comfortable playing the part of the son when he wasn't their son, even though the parents wouldn't be able to tell the difference. He decided to move the conversation forward. According to Hiruzen and Stag, the chances of Root being aware of his past were virtually non-existent. When they sent him to the orphanage, they took great care in crafting his new identity. There was a singular link between the past and present, and it was hidden, so unless someone knew exactly what they were searching for, they wouldn't find it. Takuma was glad because his reputation was safe. He didn't want to be associated with Root in any other way except as someone who hunts them down. Gray didn't seem interested and changed the subject. "What do you think about the experts' speculation about the experimentation?" Takuma wasn't expecting that question, but he, too, had doubts. "I rarely get sick, and I don't have any chronic illness. One would expect some side effects from being subjected to potentially harmful substances and procedures, but I don't feel anything wrong with me," he said. He considered the Jinjutsu resistance, but it only became apparent when Takuma took over, making it difficult to attribute it to the experimentation. He was, by no means, a medical or biology expert, but he was still the one inhabiting the body in question. Gray nodded in return. "Do you remember something?" Takuma felt uncomfortable every time he brought up Gray's past. "I can't say. I was unconscious or in pain most of the time, but I do agree with one thing that Stag said. They were constantly putting stress on my body like they were trying to bring something out," Gray said with a deep frown and sounded unsure. "Bring what out?" "We wouldn't be having this conversation if I knew the answer," Gray sighed. There was just too much unknown. Takuma wondered if his impressive chakra reserves were a result of the experimentation. But Hiruzen refused that conjecture. Yes, his chakra reserves were bountiful, but they weren't something that wasn't seen in others. "Hey, I have a question," he said. Gray stared at him. "The fact that you didn't just ask the question means something. I won't answer if I don't like it." "Why do you look like that?" It was a question he hadn't asked the last time. He was going to wait longer before bringing it up, but after the conversation they had earlier in the day, he thought the mood was right. "Like what?" Gray asked calmly, but his eyes sharpened and widened like a beast of prey. Takuma pursed his lips. He knew that both of them knew what he was about to ask. You were 10 when you died. And yet you look like a teenager. I don't even know what you were exactly. Are you a soul that couldn't cross over to the afterlife? Takuma is dead, Gray said, cutting him off. His voice was flat as a grave. I don't know about any soul business, but I know I'm not one, but I'm like this because of you. Because of me? What did I look like when we first met? A 10-year-old, Takuma replied, recalling the child dressed in rags he had witnessed during the first of Inenpachi's sessions. But then you changed. I don't know why I exist. Maybe it's because of some unresolved resentment, or maybe it's a freak accident from when you took over, but I, whatever I am, remained. At first, I wasn't really conscious, but as the years went by, I gained form within our mind and watched you live my life. He was once again reminded that Gray didn't take his own life. It bothered me that it was not me, but I also knew that I was helpless to do so. The only choice I had was to sit and watch my life change, changes that bothered me greatly because I had no control over them. I didn't have control over anything but my existence, so I decided to focus on just that. As you began to exude more control over the being known as Takuma, I fortified a corner for myself where I reluctantly watched. Takuma imagined the 10-year-old Gray sitting in the darkness behind the wall, watching his life. He tried to imagine what that would feel like. It would not have been easy. To be honest, I had gotten used to my situation after years, but then you suddenly showed up with that Yamanaka. Can you blame me when the very first thing you conveyed was that you wanted me gone? Intense rejection was all that I felt from you, Gray said, openly showing his displeasure. Takuma licked his lips. He hadn't been in great mental health back then, and Gray's presence was in the middle of it all. At that time, he didn't know what his actions had done, but after he found out more about Gray, he should have apologized, which he hadn't done. He was about to remedy his mistake, but Gray continued speaking. I got scared. That corner was the only thing that I had managed to protect from you. I had to save myself from you, which was when I made the biggest mistake. I might have power, but you were still the one in the driver's seat. I'm close to a collection of memories given will. The obvious way to strengthen myself was to get more memories. Takuma gasped. My memories. Gray nodded. He knew Gray had access to his memories, but he thought that was because he literally covered half of his mind's central hub. He didn't realize that accessing his memories was a conscious decision. I absorbed your memories to gain strength to protect myself, and that was the mistake that doomed me. What mistake? A collection of memories decided to absorb more memories. Do you know what that means? Gray had a self-reproachful smile as he said, they became a part of me. The moment I took in your memories, I came to understand you and your emotions. Before that, I could have pretended not to understand you despite having watched you struggle and make a life for yourself, but after that, I had no excuse. Gray laughed, but it sounded utterly sad and defeated. When I say Takuma is dead, I mean it in more than one way. I guess it didn't cross my mind that the moment I took in your memories, they would mix in with mine. I lost the very thing I was trying to protect. I'm neither Takuma nor you. I am what you call me. Gray. Gray, a mixture of black and white, a mix of the two people who called themselves Takuma. Then live as Gray, Takuma said after a moment of thought. He continued when Gray looked up, this mistake has made you stronger, and you know more about yourself and me. I'm happy that you understood me by absorbing my memories, and if you're going to stick around, then I'll make an effort to understand you as well. We might have gotten off on the wrong foot. And I apologize for that. If you'd like to, let's start over and make the best of the situation that we have been handed. Gray described himself as a collection of memories given will. That could also be seen as memories held together by a strong will. He didn't know what the will in question sought, but he could guess that it was the desire to live after a sudden death. Takuma would have preferred not to be in such a complicated situation, but he was going to work with it. He had already spent months ignoring the problem, dreading it, and feeling depressed because of it. He no longer wished to do those things. It was time to take action and move forward. Let's get along, Gray. Chapter 434. It was a week of rest for Takuma, devoid of the things he usually did. Aside from light warm-ups and walks around the neighborhood, he was forbidden from doing any physical training. It was a much-needed vacation that he, to his surprise, managed to spend without actually doing any work. In truth, it was a boon as he spent most of his time visiting friends and acquaintances. He spent a night at the Nenro, Masaki, and AI's house, watched a movie with Taro, gambled on horses with Anko, learned flower arrangement for Makoto, and watched fireworks at a festival with Arisu and a couple of the old narcotics task force folks. He even managed to visit Inenpachi an unprecedented 3 times in 1 week to continue their research. He had the chakra to support a 3rd clone and wanted to improve his skill with memory management to make it viable as soon as possible. A 3rd clone was going to be huge for him. It was a busy week that allowed him to relax his shoulders and heal up. How about we extend the break for a month? Gray whined. I want to bet on the ponies again. I'll make the money back, I swear. We can do it the next break, Takuma replied to his new friend and unique companion while tying the laces of his boots. He wasn't that interested in gambling, so he allowed Gray to choose his bets and lost a week's pay as a result. We both know that's never going to happen, Gray sighed. Who knew when Takuma would take his next break? Takuma got dressed in the standard leaf uniform and left for his new workplace. His paperwork for his promotion to squad leader, under the direct command of ANBU Captain Weasel, was finally processed, and his team members were officially transferred to his squad. Today was the first time they were meeting as a team. His new workplace was the ANBU headquarters, and his latest cover identity was that of the head of security for a protected facility in a restricted zone. He walked into one of the numerous secret entrances of the maze in the cliffside that housed the headquarters and followed the path he was told to memorize to arrive at the headquarters. You have arrived. A staff member waited for him inside to guide him. Unlike operatives, Takuma didn't have control over the staff attached to his squad. The General Administrative Branch of the ANBU selected them based on availability and skill. How are you doing today, Goshiro? Takuma asked the man, in his early 30s, who wore his forehead protector like a bandana over his head and a long beard that looked as though it had been well groomed. Your beard looks as magnificent as ever. I'm doing well, Rael. Thank you for your compliment, Goshiro said with a slight bow. He was the head of the staff for his squad and was a fairly experienced administrator whom Itachi had acquired for him by putting in a word with the General Administrative Branch. Have the others arrived? Takuma asked. Yes, sir. They're waiting for you, Goshiro replied as they made their way through the headquarters, which was a rather dull place, wholly illuminated with sterile lighting. It had a cooler temperature than outside because it was located underground. Takuma had set the reporting time half an hour before he arrived, allowing the squad mates to introduce and mingle with each other without the presence of their boss. While he had handpicked them, he had no way of knowing how they would work with each other. One of the things he was most concerned about was managing the relationships within the team because he wasn't very skilled in that area. I wish Arisu had been in ANBU, he thought with a sigh. In the narcotics task force, Arisu had been more people-oriented while handling the work aspect of the team. They worked together and played to their strengths. This was his first time leading a team since leading the police force, which was already a couple of years ago. When should we leave for you to introduce the team to others? Goshiro asked. People or groups didn't exist in a vacuum. A significant amount of work was accomplished through collaboration, requiring the assistance of various departments and teams. For example, if they needed quick access to information, they would need to build a connection at the information desk, hoping that they would be prioritized over other squads or units. For the new team to be effective, they had to build connections with others in the ANBU ecosystem and establish relationships with the right people. The first simple step was to go around introducing themselves. It depends on how the introduction goes. Maybe an hour? If you feel that the conversation is stalling, feel free to pull me out, Takuma said. Understood, Goshiro nodded. They reached the offices of the anti-root squad. The last time Takuma was there, the entire space was barren, but now it had been equipped and furnished with everything needed for a squad to get started. It was still empty as the members hadn't filled it with files and personal artifacts, but it surely looked like a place of work. Inside, a group of 5 people gathered around a desk, chatting amongst themselves. They immediately noticed Takuma enter and assembled to greet him. "It's nice to see all of you together," Takuma said as he gazed at the 5. "How are you, Rael?" The words came from a diminutive woman in her 30s who barely cleared 5 feet and had hair longer than her height, which she wore in 2 giant buns. Just like everyone in the room, she was dressed in the standard leaf gear, but wore an owl motif mask with her ANBU gear and went by the codename Boo-Book. "Did you take enough days off for rest?" she asked. "Thank you for asking. I'm feeling good and well," Takuma replied with a smile. They knew each other from the Anti-Root Initiative. He had seen Boo-Book's work closely and was impressed by it. The rest of the team didn't have prior experience working on root cases, so her presence as a guide alongside Takuma was going to be essential to get the ball rolling. "We heard what happened. I mean, everyone did. Root assassins, coming after an operative, it's all anyone can talk about these days," said a stylish and handsome man in his mid-30s who wore a peacock motif mask and was codenamed Moore and has caused a sizable commotion everywhere. "I heard that even the forces at the border are moving differently as a show of power." Moore was recommended to Takuma by his former captain, Taijutsu. In fact, Moore was a former member of the Inquisitor unit and had been part of one of the other squads under Barbary before he moved out due to reassignment. Boo-Book and Moore were both from minor shinobi clans. And from what he knew, Moore's clan was deeply allied with the Aburame clan and shared a similar relationship to how Arisu's Fuma clan was allied to the Uchiha clan. "We were only told that there were no casualties on our side. I wanted to contact you to ask about your health, but Goshiro informed us that you weren't taking any messages." "Captain's orders," said a stout man in his mid-30s with aggressive sideburns on his square face. Itachi's recommendation, just like the man, was different from the others in Takuma's team. Hippo was a Genin operative. Genin operatives held an interesting position within ANBU. Most of them were scouted relatively late in their shinobi careers, usually in their late 20s. They were career Genin with low chances of rank advancement due to a lack of talent in combat necessary for a Chunin. They usually had less than impressive chakra reserves, which ironically made them valuable to the ANBU because Genin operatives were often field operatives who went undercover. Their low chakra reserves ensured they wouldn't attract attention if scanned by sensory and thus were frequently overlooked as threats. The individuals scouted for the position of Genin operatives were those who, despite their weak combat potential, had done something that caught the attention of the ANBU through their work, reputation, or unique skill set. In many ways, the requirements for Genin operatives were more stringent than the general recruitment because they were arguably in more danger, and ANBU needed to know if they were getting someone who could perform under pressure. A vast majority of Genin operatives were employed by the ANBU's foreign branch and were posted on foreign soil, where invisibility was key. However, the domestic branch also had some operatives. Hippo was one of them and had worked with ANBU for a whopping decade. "I appreciate your concern, Hippo. Weasel wanted me to rest and made sure I wasn't disturbed," Takuma said. He then turned to face the most controversial member of the squad, the Hokage's recommendation and a shinobi who bore the same clan name as the traitor Shimura Danzo. The woman, in her early 20s, had sharp features and slick, black hair tied in a thin ponytail. From the get-go, she seemed nervous and had been standing a step apart from the rest of the team. The squad was set up to hunt down an organization set up by her traitorous clan leader, whose agents had tried to kill her new boss just a week ago. She was in a more than awkward position. "During the break, I went to watch the movie you talked about during our interview with my friend. It was a great recommendation, Turn," Takuma said with a smile. Turn seemed visibly relieved upon hearing his words. "I'm glad you enjoyed it, Rael," she said. While he was still slightly concerned and suspicious about her connection to Danzo and the fact that she's an ANBU, which made her a perfect candidate for a mole. He had looked into her past, and her work as an operative spoke for itself. Even the background check he ordered came out as clean as an ANBU operative could have. He trusted that the Hokage wouldn't sabotage ANBU's efforts against Root and decided to focus on what was in front of him, which was her good work and clean record. The final member of Takuma's squad was the one with the least experience and accomplishment in the team. In fact, he had only been an ANBU operative exactly as long as Takuma. Usually, he wouldn't have been able to get out of the initial application submission stage because he just didn't have enough to make it on the team. But he made up for his lack of experience and accomplishments with something else. Takuma raised his hand for a handshake as he stared into a pair of eerie, pupilless, pale white eyes. Hyuga's Byakugan. One of 3 great Dojutsu, the bloodline limit of arguably the current strongest clan in the Hidden Leaf. It's nice to see you again, Akila. Codename Akila, real name Hyuga Kojiro, known to Takuma as 7, belonged to the same recruitment batch as Takuma. He now had a Hyuga in his team. Just thinking about it made him ecstatic. Chapter 435, with the introductions over, the squad moved into the meeting room for their first informal meeting. The room had 2 rows of long benches facing a podium on wheels at the front. Takuma stood behind the podium as the team took their first seat on the benches. I'm sure everyone has questions. I'll field them now, so go ahead, Takuma said, expecting all hands to go up, but to his surprise, only 2 of his new subordinates raised their hands. More, he said, pointing to the former Inquisitor unit member. What are you trying to accomplish with his squad? More asked. Takuma thought they would want to ask questions about the assassination attempt because even though the talk spread around, they were still ANBU. People knew which parts they could safely gossip about and which to keep to themselves. And even ANBU weren't safe from information getting twisted inside the rumor mill as it passed from one ear to the next. The reliability of the information was determined by how close the person was to the source of the information. As far as proximity went, Takuma was the source. But that wasn't the question that was asked. In fact, at first glance, Moore's question seemed stupid because everyone in the room already knew they had joined an anti-Root squad, but it was, in fact, very pertinent. Their reason for existing was obviously to rid the Hidden Leaf of the problem known as Root. What Moore and others wanted to know was how Takuma planned to accomplish that. They could go after the agents themselves, the Root's lifeblood, and hunt them down until there wasn't enough manpower to sustain their operations. Or they could pour all of their effort into finding Danzo. Given its cult-like culture, Root would fall apart without its absolute leader. Their Jonin would eventually gain power, but without someone like Danzo holding them together, the new factions would split apart due to arguments that would naturally rise in the absence of a singular voice. Not all agents would have even stayed after Danzo's death, either. Even if those Jonin-led factions swore revenge against Hidden Leaf, they would be significantly easier to deal with in comparison to Root. There were many ways to approach the problem, each with its own advantages and challenges. I want to erase Root's influence within the Land of Fire, he answered. I'm treating this as an evolving situation. For now, I don't want anyone hiring Root, much less helping them. Associating with Root means making an enemy out of Hidden Leaf. Why go about it in such a roundabout way? Turn, the controversial Shimura, asked. Why not just target the spider's head? Takuma knew she shared no love for her former clan leader. What Danzo did left a stain on the Shimura clan that was nearly impossible to scrub off. Their decline was all but set in stone. It wasn't going to happen anytime soon because they were still one of the major clans in the Hidden Leaf village with a deep history, and were still entirely capable of nurturing Jonin in the future, but like Turn, those Jonin would always carry the burden of being the blood of a traitor. Ironically, it drew parallels with the Uchiha clan and their traitorous clan leader, Uchiha Madara, whose abandonment of the village and subsequent attempts to destroy it had put a burden on the Uchiha. The Uchiha were forced to chain themselves to the Hidden Leaf military police by the second Hokage. The difference between the Uchiha and Shimura clans was that the former were not once complicit with their clan leader. Madara had tried to convince the Uchiha clan to leave with him, but they had firmly refused, not wanting to forsake the peace gained from forming the Hidden Leaf Village. In the end, he was the only one who betrayed them. The Shimura clan, on the other hand, grew under Danzo's influence and even used his methods, gaining them a shady reputation. Besides, the Shimura clan couldn't be compared to the Uchiha of the Sharingan, who managed to remain the strongest clan and only declined to the Nine-Tails incident, and even that was arguable. But even if the Shimura remained a prominent clan, they would eventually be the weakest among their peers. And Turn, whose career in ANBU was looking bright, had been absolutely screwed by Danzo. Who in their right mind would trust her now? She was lucky not to be fired and ever luckier that nothing came up when the Hokage scoured through her life with a fine-toothed comb. He wouldn't have recommended her if he found anything significant connecting her to Danzo. Her situation reminded Takuma of Anko. Like Anko, Turn enjoyed the influence of her authority figure, but was later forced to bear the weight of his betrayal. Of course, Turn wasn't squeaky clean herself. He had seen her file. She had done some stuff in and out of ANBU, but the same could be said of many people, including Takuma himself. How would we do that? Takuma asked Turn. There's no reliable way to track agents other than intelligence finding about one of their missions in time, and that's as close to happenstance if it isn't a national-level threat. Tracking down Shimura Danzo is perhaps even harder. We have been unable to force out his location from any agents in our custody, regardless of the methods we used. Only after he finished speaking did Takuma notice that his words had been entirely negative. While it was sensible to be realistic about what they could do, it wasn't good to emphasize all the things they couldn't do in front of a newly formed team. I'm not saying we should ignore the direct approach. We can't destroy Root without actually getting our hands on them, but I want our focus to be on turning the Land of Fire into a hostile environment averse to Root's growth. Boo Book, with her Mickey Mouse hair, said, "So, we are going to target their associates and allies?" "Correct," Takuma smiled. Boo Book was part of the anti-Root initiative, so she knew more about what he had been doing than others. He addressed the others. Root is not a big organization by any means. In fact, the ANBU is a relatively small department in the context of our overall responsibilities, which is why we actively collaborate with other departments. We have our intelligence desk, but the bulk of what we know comes from the Leaf Intelligence Division. We use Torture and Intelligence's facilities and expertise, and use General Forces for protection. Most of Takuma's work had been finding the right people who could get the job done. Cases like the Fire Prairie Border Outpost, where he had to do everything personally, were the exceptions. Usually, his work resembled how things went in the Maizuru assassination case, where he utilized the local shinobi to find the people of interest. Just like we rely on others, Root does the same. Unless Danzo wants to turn his men into pure mercenaries, which he isn't going to do, he has to work with other people. Root might not have a leak, but I'll bet money that someone somewhere will say something they aren't supposed to. Danzo was a warmonger who preferred to pull strings from the shadows. An old dog wasn't going to change his ways so far into his life, especially when he was kicked out of his kingdom. "Are you confident that Danzo is in the Land of Fire?" asked Aquila. "I am," Takuma nodded to the Hyuga. "Then wouldn't making the Land of Fire hostile cause him to move out of the country?" Aquila asked. "Instead, let's say if we go after the agents. It'll be slow and irregular, but if he keeps failing consistently, he'll find work outside our borders. It'll reduce his influence in the country, but he will keep his main base in country. Not to mention, it'll make him a problem in the eyes of other powers. However, if he makes the Land of Fire so hostile that he finds it difficult to develop Root here and decides to shift his base to another country? If that happens, it will be tough to hit him when we eventually find him." Nothing existed in isolation, and Root was no exception. They needed weapons. He was sure they had a master blacksmith or two in their service, but they evidently weren't enough because Root purchased weaponry when they were still part of Hidden Leaf. That would not change, especially after their expulsion. If he made it so that no weapon supplier would dare supply them, they would face difficulties. Not just weapons. What if ANBU managed to make it so that Root had difficulty procuring chakra ink? Different seals required different inks, and it wasn't something one could learn to make in a short amount of time. There was a reason the Hyuga clan had a chokehold on the industry. It would not only affect their Fuenin's ability to create, but more importantly, it would also make it difficult for them to train new ones. Someone somewhere would still be willing to sell them weapons, ink, and other materials, but everything would come at a steep markup. If someone wanted to hire Root, how would they go about it? They didn't have a building with their name on it that one could visit. The deals at those levels were handled by underworld fixers who procured services for their clients' needs. What if Takuma made it so that most fixers wouldn't even want to touch Root? How would they get jobs to earn the funds they needed to sustain themselves, let alone grow? That was the type of hostility Takuma wanted to instill, because facing that type of hostility, it would be foolish to have Root's base of operations in such an environment. Danzo will not, in any circumstance, leave the land of fire, Takuma declared to the room. Everyone seemed to be confused about where his confidence was coming from. Even Bubuk from the Anti-Root Initiative and Turn from the Shimura clan didn't seem to understand his statement. Listen to the words I'm about to say carefully. You must understand the man you're trying to bring down, Takuma said, looking at everyone in the room. More than anything, Shimura Danzo desires the Hidden Leaf to be strong, stronger than the other hidden villages, stronger than the Fire Daimyo and his samurai. And he thinks he's the only one who can accomplish it because, in his eyes, the Hidden Leaf is weak. At the end of the day, Root is merely a means for him to achieve his goals. Before, it was to influence things in the manner he saw fit for the Hidden Leaf. Now, he's using Root to get back to the Hidden Leaf and take control. What he truly cares about is this village. It's his life obsession. He was kicked out of the village. Imagine how it would feel if he were forced out of the country. No, he wouldn't allow that to happen. Even if it's disadvantageous, he'll stay, because leaving the country would mean accepting that he and his goals have regressed. If Danzo were young, he might have considered a tactical retreat, but at his age, he had to know that he didn't have the time. If he wanted to make meaningful changes to the Hidden Leaf, he needed time, and for that, he required a position of power as soon as possible. At this stage of life, Danzo's only choice was to progress. He also knows that he can't take the village by force. Even if Root somehow gets powerful enough, without the clans, he'll never become the Hokage. It would be impossible to gain control of the village without that internal support. Even if Root somehow gained enough power to lay siege on the Hidden Leaf village, it wouldn't matter if he made an enemy out of everyone. A Kage might be a military dictator, but power, for all it's worth, was given. The clans, the shinobi, and the civilians gave power to the Kage. Without their willingness to follow the rule, the position of a Kage would be worthless. It shouldn't come as a surprise to you that even now, there are forces who'd support Danzo. Now imagine how those people would feel when they hear that Danzo was forced to abandon the Land of Fire. Will that inspire confidence in him? Would they still think that he might be a strong leader? He'd be trapped, said Hippo. Takuma nodded. The only way out for Danzo is to get stronger, and I'm not going to allow that to happen. Root's only future is to slowly die. Chapter 436. The meeting continued for some more time before Rael left for his round of greetings. He dismissed the squad for the day, but they hung around to decide who would use which office. They had to set up their offices quickly so they could start working, as the assassination attempt had already delayed their launch. Bubuk, standing in her office while wondering how she would fit in her usual, turned around from a knock on the door. "Hi, neighbor," Moore greeted with a smile. "I thought Aquila wanted that office. He wanted a room facing east. I got him one. Brokered a three-way deal with me, him, and Hippo. Hippo wanted a corner office, so I gave him mine. He gave his to Aquila, and I got the one beside you. What did you get out of the deal?" "I get to be near the snack room." Moore winked. "Hey, can I ask a question?" he asked when she nodded. "About Rael?" You're the only one who knew him before this." "I have talked to him a couple of times, and don't get me wrong, he seemed pleasant, but it's by no means enough to know someone. Especially my squad leader, whom I'm going to be spending a lot of time with. It was crucial to accurately assess a team's culture, which was always shaped by the leader, to avoid potential problems by getting on the leader's bad side. What do you want to know? Just remember, our relationship was more of a collaboration than teamwork. Boo-Book had never actually worked under Rael because that's not how the initiative worked. Instead, he was the source of information that many others used. Rael's goal for the squad wasn't a new strategy. He had been finding Root's known associates and allies, and getting others in the initiative to target them. It'd be nice to know more about him, so I, at least, don't get on his bad side by something I would not have done if I knew he didn't like it, Moore said. Boo-Book thought for a moment. He values work. Produce results, and he'll look at you favorably. He's not unreasonable either. He's willing to listen and offer flexibility on how you want to do things. So, no micromanagement? Moore asked, hopefully. He's hands-off for the most part, but you need to keep him in the loop unless he specifically asks for plausible deniability. Don't misunderstand, he likes control. He'll read the reports, likes to be up to date, and asks questions that you must have answers to, she replied seriously. While Rael valued results, it wasn't above all else. He was very involved with the people to whom he shared information and what they did with it. Someone dodged him after getting vital information, trying to covet credit, but then they screwed up badly. The kicker was that none of it would have happened if they hadn't avoided Rael. He worked with them again, but they never got anything more than scraps. He takes responsibility for things tied to him even if he's not the one working on them, so if you aren't trying to do a good job, he'd rather not associate with you. Respect him and the work, and he'll respect you. That was probably why Rael had chosen her. Out of everyone he worked with, Boo-Book hadn't produced the best results, but she worked with him the best. They argued and had differences in opinions, but they always managed to reach an agreement that satisfied both of them without any feelings of misgiving. What about politics? Feel like he doesn't like to dip into that pool, Moore asked. It's not his favorite, but he will absolutely do so to get what he wants out of it, so don't worry about our squad getting screwed over because he doesn't know how to play. But in the team, I think it'll be better if we just do the work. He's good at identifying credit, which also means he's also good at knowing who doesn't deserve it. So, you're a big fan, huh? Boo-Book shrugged. I like him. Doesn't mean I agree with everything he does. Just looking at the squad. She was the only one from the initiative. If it were her, she would have taken at least 2 more to ensure the team had a stable base of experience and would have supplemented it by hiring 2 people with skills others didn't have. Rael might not like politics, but the way he had formed the squad was clearly motivated by politics. Instead of forging a closer relationship with the anti-Root initiative, he chose to build connections elsewhere. Why else would there be a Shimura on the team? Boo-Book knew that a lot of people in the initiative weren't fans of the hiring decision. They felt he had taken advantage of their efforts and reaped the rewards without sharing with them, even though most of them wouldn't have gotten said reward if the entire squad was formed from the initiative. In fact, being the sole initiative member in the squad made Boo-Book a target of envy, dissatisfaction, and anger because she didn't produce the best results. Rael had prioritized someone he got along with, and that itself didn't sit well with the others. It was a choice, whether it was right or wrong, only time would tell. Straight-faced. While Moore and Boo-Book talked in the latter's office, the remaining 3 members themselves were having a similar conversation about their squad leader in the snack room over coffee. So, what do you think about Rael? Hippo asked as he poured an amount of sugar that disgusted the others into his coffee. I'd never worked under someone this young, but you guys are closer to him in age, so help me out, yeah? How old is he anyway? 15, said Aquila as his finger hovered over the selection of snacks. Hippo whistled. Is that younger or older than Weasel? Do you have a problem working under someone younger? Turn asked him. Hippo waved his hand with a laugh. Not at all. I've worked under plenty of younger people, but not someone as young as Rael, at least not directly. Honestly, I was doubtful if someone so young would be able to efficiently lead a team. I mean, Not everyone can be like Weasel. That's an unfair comparison. That guy is an anomaly, Turn said. If you have doubts, then why did you join? Aquila asked. I got a recommendation. I'm past my days of spending more time in the field than at home. As a genin operative, Hippo spent much of his time in the field doing a lot of things, from collecting information to keeping an eye on a person of interest and sometimes even sabotaging things that ANBU didn't want to happen. He was away from home for weeks, sometimes even months at a time. I felt it was time to step away from that type of stuff. I had a choice between this and switching to a staff position, said Hippo. Genin operatives who were interested opted to switch to a staff position whenever a position opened, and if they passed their training and trial period, they successfully transitioned. Didn't want to switch to staff? That would have kept you behind a desk permanently, said Turn with a smirk. A lot of genin operatives didn't want to switch to staff because most of them knew they didn't have what it took to become a chunin and would remain career genin until they joined ANBU and became special. It was a matter of immense pride for most, and to forego that position to become a staff member didn't sit well with them. If they were going to stop being operatives, they would rather leave ANBU altogether than switch to a staff position. I did it for my marriage, Hippo replied. Both of them were confused by the response. I have been married for 8 years. During that period, the number of times I have spent 2 months at home at a time, where I returned home every night, can be counted on my fingers. If I suddenly started coming home every day, it would drive my missus crazy. How? Isn't that good? Aquila said with a frown. Oh no, it's not. The normal of our marriage is that we spend a couple of weeks to a month together, passionately, before I disappear for a while, and then we repeat that. It's fun, and we try to make the most of our limited time together. I'm sure the first 3 months of being around all the time would be great, but then we would start driving each other crazy being together every day, because it would be too different from what we have been living. We need a transition, and while this job isn't perfect for it, it's the best option I have. Aquila and Turn looked at each other. The words made sense, and it was surprising to hear them from Hippo because his first impression was of a butch man who wouldn't usually think about things like these, much less share them with his new co-workers. I must say, the assassination attempt does help with my confidence in the young boss, said Hippo. The whole thing was more than impressive. Just being a big enough problem for Root to send assassins into the Hidden Leaf Village added to Rael's reputation, but his turning the tables on them and killing the assassins made him somewhat of a legend. Weasel chose him, I guessed he must be good, Turn replied when Hippo turned to her. In truth, she didn't have much of a choice. Her situation was terrible. For the past 2 years, she had been stuck. She was an outcast in her own team and was kept away from any and all good cases. She couldn't even transfer because no one was willing to take her. Turn wanted to quit when she realized there was no future for her, but her clan shut her down because a member of ANBU was important for them, given their current situation. Even an outcast agent had value. She tried to reason with her clan multiple times, but they didn't budge. It was such a tough time in her life that she was furious when Rael called her, thinking it was a cruel joke, but then she realized it was a real offer. She still couldn't believe it until she was sitting across from Rael, talking about her history to see if she would be a good fit. When he finally offered the job, there was only one answer. I wanted to work under Weasel, Aquila answered straightforwardly. He's the foremost candidate for the next ANBU commander. When I heard he was going to form a new squad, one that would be taking on the Root case, it was a no-brainer. I applied immediately. The squad's position in the hierarchy was advantageous because they weren't part of a unit and reported directly to Weasel without an ANBU lieutenant between them in the chain. It put them closer to Weasel than others in their position, giving them a higher chance of leaving an impression on the captain. Rael was a prime example of what that could become. He caught the eye of Weasel and was made a squad leader when he had only been in ANBU for a little over a year. Most squad leaders were only promoted to their positions after 5 years of experience, at least. Aquila had given the reason why he had applied, and they could guess why Rael had chosen him. Among the squad, Aquila had the least experience, but none of that mattered when he had the pale eyes that could make up for that lack of experience. As Turn said, Weasel chose him. "I'm sure he'll be at least competent," he said. A staff member called the entire squad to the bullpen. He held a stack of files and distributed them to the gathered team. "This is the official report for the Rael's assassination incident. The squad will be in charge of the case, so Rael wants all of you to get familiar with it," said the staff member. In truth, everyone in the squad was curious about the assassination attempt before, but they couldn't because they didn't want to bombard him with questions on his first day back. Book had asked them to avoid the questions until some other day, but now they had the report in their hands. Even though all of them got a copy, none of them moved. They settled down in the bullpen to read through the report together. They didn't notice when the staff member had gone away as they continued to read the account of events. They learned about the training field, the barrier that trapped Rael inside, and they found out about the Gemini brothers. The agent duo was infamous enough that ANBU had records on them, which stated their speciality. They saw the images of destruction in the training field, pored over the first-hand accounts, and read Rael's medical records, giving them a picture of what might have happened. "So, I think we can agree. We have a madman amongst us," Hippo said, voicing others' thoughts. Chapter 437. The next day, Takuma arrived at the office in the morning with his belongings in a crate and his office furniture packed in a storage scroll. The greetings to the relevant people in the headquarters had gone well. They had treated him better than they would have treated a new squad leader because he was a direct report to a captain. It would take some time to build rapport with everyone. As the leader, it was his responsibility to create connections for his team. Fortunately, those connections would stay with him even if he went away, so it was well worth the time and effort. Takuma greeted everyone as he entered the office. "Good morning, everyone." Turn, Book, and Aquila were already there when he arrived. As he walked through the bullpen to reach his office, he noticed them looking at him strangely. He stopped and asked if there was something wrong. "Are you well, Rael?" Book asked. "Is it okay for you to return?" "It's only been a week," Turn said with a hint of worry. Even Aquila was looking at him as though he was trying to look for something. He turned to Goshiro, his head of staff, sitting in his office, through the open door. "They read the incident report for the assassination attempt yesterday," he said loudly. Takuma laughed. Yes, the assassination attempt had left him in a poor condition, but he had been in worse condition before. The last time Root had sent assassins after him, he had needed a life-saving operation, had to relearn how to walk, and was deployed to the Steamfrost War with a cane less than 2 months later. "Yes, I'm well. Thank you for asking. ANBU has great medical benefits. I'm in no condition to fight, but I've resumed light training. I estimate I'll be back to normal in another week or so." In truth, he could fight at his peak in his current condition. Jutsu was magic with its ability to heal him from his combat injuries in such a short amount of time. Regardless, his body was still injured not so long ago. He was currently in a state where the chances of injury under strain were much higher than normal. So while he could hit just as hard, run just as fast, and exert his chakra without any obstruction, he could get injured while doing any of those things. In short, he was a glass cannon. 10 minutes later, Moore and Hippo arrived. Moore brought coffee for everyone in the office, including the staff. Takuma noticed it about him when they first met, but Moore was very good with people and had a knack for communication. Barbary told him that it hurt to let Moore go because of his soft skills, especially his interpersonal abilities, which allowed him to get people to cooperate or get more out of things than others usually could. "Hey, Rael. I have some questions about the assassination incident," Moore said as he handed him a cup of coffee. "So do I," Hippo yelled from his office. Takuma looked around the office and felt the curiosity radiating from all of them. He could tell that everyone was curious about the incident. Having easy access to the main person of interest naturally made them want to ask questions. They were also in charge of the investigation, and having more information could only benefit them. "Those who have questions can come to the meeting room in 10, Takuma announced. 10 minutes later, the entire squad was in the meeting room. I'll do my best to answer. Let's start from the front and move back, he said, pointing to more. The site of the incident, the training field, wasn't maintained by ANBU. Was it a place you visited often on a fixed schedule? He asked. As operatives, they had access to high-quality training resources, so unless there was a reason like training with someone outside ANBU, there was no reason why an ANBU unit wouldn't use department-provided benefits. Moore was asking what he was doing there without outright asking. Takuma guessed that he already had some idea why he was there. It was a sharp question to ask the new boss and ran the risk of offending him. From what he knew about him, he was trying to see how he would respond to a situation where he was doubted or his authority was questioned. It was important to know the leader's personality because it dictated how they responded to different situations. It was an attempt to gauge that, so he could alter his approach in the future. The others also understood the hidden intention behind his question and gazed at him. Takuma didn't break eye contact with Moore. Root leveraged an acquaintance to lure me to the training field. He made sure to be as calm and professional as possible because he wanted his subordinates to ask questions and communicate without the fear of retaliation. He had enjoyed great results because he had mostly worked alone, but there was a limit to that, something that he tried to remedy by supplying intel and resources he cultivated to others in the initiative. He wanted to do more with this squad, but throwing more people at the problem didn't guarantee results. They needed to work together towards a common goal to be productive. His priority as the squad leader was to foster a healthy and correct work culture. Chunin Inomoto, correct? What was your relationship with him? We were acquainted through my work at the Leaf Military Police Force, Takuma said. If it were anyone else, he would have avoided the question, but the group in front of him were ANBU nin with the ability to pull background checks on most people. They would immediately know about Inomoto's drug trade connections if they decided to look into it. By twisting the truth with omissions, he presented a picture in which Inomoto was either an asset or they had dealings, both of which were true. The latter didn't look good, but this was ANBU, shady dealings like that were common here. The reports claim him to be missing. That's unfortunate. I wouldn't lose hope, Moore said, relaxing his line of questioning. It seemed he had gotten what he wanted. It's a waste of time. He's already dead, I asked one of the agents, Takuma replied before noticing that his nonchalant reaction had surprised others. My apologies. We didn't really get along. Perhaps that's why he was chosen. If it were a friend or family member, they would have tried to alert me in some way. That bastard probably sold me out without hesitation to save his own neck. I can't even blame him for that either. Next question, he said, pointing to Hippo. It wasn't clear in the report. How did Root find out about your identity? There was mention of an agent codenamed Khan that you share some history with, but nothing beyond that. Takuma sighed. The report wasn't clear about it because he himself didn't know how Root had found out about him, at least, he wasn't sure about it. Our best guess is that I was overexposed to Root. I have personally handled one too many cases to the point that they ended up noticing me. I was involved in a case where we discovered a sleeper cell. During the raid to capture them, one of them managed to escape. He clicked his tongue. I'm sure Rael entered Root's radar back then, if not earlier. As for how they connected me to Rael, I can't be sure. The agent codenamed Khan was probably responsible in some capacity. I ran into him when I was deployed to the Steamfrost War and had to deal with Root trying to interfere in the war. You weren't an operative back then, Hippo said, taken aback. I was not. It was a situation where ANBU couldn't send their own, so my team had to deal with them on our own. Khan knew me from back then and must have connected the facts. But that's not the problem right now, Takuma sighed, feeling irritation rising. My exposure limits my movements. If I'm investigating something related to Root in the field and they somehow become aware of my presence, they might take extra precautions that they might not have if they were unaware. When an operative wore their mask, they enjoyed the full authority and reputation of ANBU behind them. But the mask was like a bright beacon that couldn't be hidden. The moment ANBU nin stepped into the scene, everyone knew of their presence. They could hide their presence, but they sacrificed the benefits by doing so. On the other hand, when an operative removed their mask, they lost their authority but, in turn, gained anonymity that could be leveraged to appear harmless and invisible if utilized correctly. Takuma had slipped into the Maizuru quarters without his mask, and by the time they realized, it was already too late. He had used that same anonymity in other situations where he had combined it with his young age to present himself as just another teenager. That hadn't disappeared yet, but his face was out there, and there were always chances that someone someday would recognize him, putting whatever he was doing at risk. What if that something was critical? Because of that, I'll be relying on you to do field work when I think that my presence might be a risk, Takuma said with a smile, looking over the group. It was a show of comforting trust that he believed in them, but also a warning that they better rise up to the occasion when the time came. About this case. You put all of us in charge of it. Who's the lead? Turn asked. Usually, even with multiple operatives on the case, there was always a lead. Even if two operatives decided to work together on equal standing, someone had to be put in the leading position, but yesterday, Takuma had put a whopping 5 operatives on the case without naming a lead. To be honest, I wanted to name myself the lead, but it's already unusual to assign a case to someone who is involved, and naming me as the lead would be too much, said Takuma. Stag had used his authority to assign the case to him. He hadn't asked for it because he wasn't expecting it, so Takuma was happy. Now, I won't lie by saying I don't care about the people, agents or not, who set up the barrier that kept me inside, but that's not the reason I decided to give this to you. Treat this like a justification to poke your nose where it usually wouldn't belong. ANBU operatives were territorial about everything from the cases they handled to the informants they developed. They turned hostile at the mere glance from someone else at what they claimed to be theirs. And the Hidden Leaf Village was a hotbed of territorial operatives who turned feral the moment someone even stepped as much as a pinky toe into their territory. There are root agents in the Hidden Leaf. That's a serious problem that can't be ignored. By putting all of you on this case, which will require you to go around the Hidden Leaf Village, visiting places you shouldn't be, talking to people you aren't supposed to, I'm giving all of you a reason to do so. Use it as a shield. If anyone cries, send them my way. I will take care of it. It was going to be very difficult to deny a guy who was the victim of an assassination attempt because of how it looked. Find me the rot festering in the village and uproot it, Takuma declared. As for the on-paper lead, it's going to be Aquila. Everyone looked at the Hyuga with envy because even though Takuma had said that all of them were equal, there was some value in being the on-paper lead. It would be easier to claim credit when it was on the record. Boo-Book and Moore will be this team's contact with the Anti-Root Initiative, he said. Boo-Book was part of the initiative, and Moore was good with people. A combination of the two would do well to settle the dissatisfaction brewing in the initiative due to his hiring decision. Hippo will be in charge of developing assets and informants. Hippo had by far the most experience of anyone in the team. He had the right type of experience, which allowed him to connect with people who usually had the information. It wasn't like others couldn't develop their own assets, but Hippo was going to be in charge of most of them. That's it, Takuma said. The silence that followed spoke volumes. There was only one person on the team who hadn't been addressed. And everyone wondered if her family had something to do with that. Chapter 438. The next day, Takuma was at a hole-in-the-wall soup restaurant for lunch with Arisu. It was the kind of place entirely sustained by its regulars and rarely saw new customers unless they came in with the regulars. The old lady should be arrested. Her cooking is addictive, Arisu said as she chowed down on her hot noodle soup. Takuma smiled. That was very much a joke from someone who worked at the Department of Narcotics Control. Yes, the task force that was once part of the Department of Organized Crime had been spun off into its own entity under the police force. It meant they would lose organized crime's resources, but in return they would gain a level of autonomy difficult to achieve within the political web of the most influential police force's department. And Fuma Arisu was there at the forefront of the new department as one of its true founders. Congratulations, he said. Arisu grinned. Thank you, but this isn't going to cut it, you know. I want something more than a lunch treat. Who said I was paying? She quirked a brow. You aren't? Of course, I am paying, he chuckled. And I'm offended that you think I didn't come bearing gifts. He took out a thick stack of files and slid it across the table towards her. It was a messy pile with dog-eared pages, notes sticking out of the corners, messy handwriting on the covers, and even some loose papers between the folders. What's this? She asked. It's time you started thinking about making chunin. Arisu stared at him for a moment before putting down her spoon. She reached for the files and began rifling through them. The filing folders were generic ones, but she recognized the sticky notes, the ink color, and the paper clips from the stationery used by the police force and the narcotics task force. The formatting and structure of the documents were the ones they established in the early days of the narcotics task force. More importantly, she recognized Takuma's handwriting. I have never seen this before. Why now? Arisu asked seriously when she realized what he had given her. You have seen a good amount of it, just not gathered in the same place like this. The documents were all related to the drug ring run by Inomoto. During his time as the head of the narcotics task force, Takuma hadn't just helped Inomoto grow his operation by aggressively targeting the competition, he had also protected him by doing a few things here and there that would make it harder for anyone going after Inomoto to gather enough material against him to target them in any real seriousness. Most of the dirt on Inomoto was already present in the Narcotics Task Force archives. Takuma had put it there himself. They worked together by helping each other, and it was in their best interest to protect each other at all costs, but he didn't omit facts and evidence from the official records. He could have done it, but he didn't. He just made it difficult to put together. Looking back at it, a part of him wanted someone to find the things he had there against Inomoto. Unfortunately, he had done too good a job and no one had found it since he had left the police force. Arisu noticed that the bottom quarter of the stack was different from the rest. The stationery was no longer the one they used at the police force. The handwriting was still Takuma's, but the way he presented and recorded information had changed. She could tell that it had been collected over a long period of time, and a rough skim was enough for her to know that her team didn't know a substantial amount of what was written in front of her. How did you get this? She asked. That's a question with a complicated answer that I can't give you, Takuma said. It wasn't complicated. He had been collecting information on Inomoto since joining the Inquisitor unit. He had reactivated relationships with his informants from the police force, which took some effort because he hadn't been in contact for a long time. Combining that with an ANBU union's resources, it wasn't hard for him to get the juicy stuff, which would get the shady guy in a lot of trouble. Inomoto was one of the pain points in his background. One that he wanted covered. So he devoted valuable time in one of the busiest periods of his life to prepare for the possibility that his unlawful dealings would be used against him. The look of disappointment in Arisu's eyes hurt. He wanted to look away. It wasn't just that he didn't answer her question, but also that he had all of this information with him and he had never gave it to her, or that he had hidden things from her while he was at the police force. The Narcotics Task Force team under Takuma wasn't stupid. They knew something had to be going on when he came up with incriminating information against important people that would usually be hard to get. They ignored it, but everyone was aware of it. No one thought less of him or judged his character for how he got those things because of how he conducted himself as their leader. They believed that whatever he was doing wasn't crossing the line because they genuinely trusted him and thought he was protecting them by keeping their hands clean. But what he had given her now brought up what they had ignored and shone a spotlight on it. She now had an idea of the extent of things he had done back then. He had helped to grow the thing they were working so hard to take down. It felt like spitting on their efforts, and that made it difficult to come to terms with it, even though they had benefited greatly from it. What he had done back then was now the foundation of the newly formed Department of Narcotics Control, a tainted foundation. If it were someone else, perhaps it wouldn't have meant as much, but this was Arisu. The Narcotics Task Force was just as much as her baby as it was his. Why now? She asked. Takuma knew that giving his information to Arisu would make their relationship tense for the foreseeable future, but it had to be done now. It's an opportune time. Their leader is dead. They're trying to hide it, but it's going to blow up sooner or later. You should strike while they're unstable and factions are trying to vie for the head position. Takuma didn't want to dredge up things while Inomoto was alive because there was a risk of it backfiring on him, but now that he was dead or at least missing, this was the perfect chance to bury his past so it wouldn't ever come after him. This gift is heavy. She smiled bitterly. Takuma nodded. He wanted to say something, but he held his tongue. With the task force transitioning into an independent department, it would become difficult for Arisu, a genin, to hold her position as the second-in-command. If she managed to bring down Inomoto's rapidly growing drug ring, it would keep her in the position while she got herself ready for the Chunin promotion and even add to her achievements, making it easier to justify an internal promotion. It was entirely beneficial for her, and she knew that as well, but if he said that, it would sound like he was doing this for her when both of them knew that he was doing it for himself, too. Straight-faced. The hope growing within her now flickered like a feeble flame in harsh, cold winds. She glanced at her boss, who was nearly a decade younger than her, leaning against a railing inside the headquarters, not knowing what was going on in his head. "Do you smoke?" Rael asked. She nodded and held out a half-empty pack to him for him to chuckle. "I don't smoke, but you look like you need one desperately, and I apologize for that." "Pardon?" "I wanted to talk to you earlier, but I got busy with another matter that demanded my attention," Rael said as he turned his back to the railing and leaned. "I won't waste either of our time and get straight to it. As it currently stands, you're a liability to the squad." Turn clenched her fist. Then why had he selected her for the squad? Was it just to humiliate her? Or was it a punishment for being the clan of a traitor who dared to continue being an ANBU? "Because you were recommended," he said, startling her. "Why did I choose you?" "That's what you're thinking, correct?" She couldn't reply from the surprise that he had read her. "You were recommended to me by someone reliable, and well, I looked into you, and your record suggests that you're at least competent. Believe me when I say that I didn't fill a precious spot in my squad to choose someone I don't intend to put to work." "Then why?" "Because you're a liability. That's the truth, no matter how you put it. Your status as a Shimura is the biggest disadvantage inside ANBU, even pure incompetence might have been better. Between Aquila, a Hyuga, and you, he will have a much better time poking in places we aren't supposed to. You don't have Boo-Book's connection in the initiative, and I can't even make a case that you might be just as good as more because literally everyone in the initiative would feel uncomfortable sharing information with you." Turn was aware of all that, and that's what made it so infuriating because the problem was caused by something she had no control over. The Shimura clan's reputation was in the dumps, and even if she wanted to revive, no one was giving her a chance to even try. And they're not alone. You were the hardest hire. I had to consider whether you were still in ANBU because you wanted to slog through it or because your clan had forced you to stay. If it's later, you can understand how I'd feel while providing information to you, and it somehow makes it to Danzo. Turn's eyes shrank from anger. Even if it was a valid concern, he was openly insulting her clan. Anyone else, she would have said something, but she couldn't defend her clan in front of her boss, who held the lifeline she so sought so much. Turn felt tired. He didn't trust her. It wasn't anything new to her. She had already tried gaining the trust of 2 different teams, one of whom she was part of before the Roots exodus and thus had positive relationships with the people, and none of her efforts had worked. No matter what she had tried, they hadn't changed their opinion. She felt no reason why this would be any different, especially when Rael seemed to have only taken her in because of a recommendation. She wished she had the name of that person to see if they would be more willing to work with her. She wondered what he was going to ask her to do. The 2 teams she had been on had asked her to serve in a support role for anyone who needed help, and said that they were going to judge her based on how useful she was. But most of the people in the team never asked her for help in fear that they would be screwed over. She had even tried to force herself into the work they were doing just to have something to do and maybe even show them what she could do, but that only got her a reprimand when the others complained about her. And when they did ask her for help, they never gave her any credit after the work was done. When she complained, no one took her side and accused her of not being a team player. "You and I will work a case together," Rael said. Turn's eyes widened. The squad's goal is to find Root's accomplices and associates, and we need to start working on them immediately. You and I are going to work together on one while the rest of the squad establishes a foothold in the village. She felt the flame of hope burn brighter for a moment before she snuffed it out because this seemed like another avenue that would lead her to do all the work and not get the credit. It's not going to be like your previous teams, Rael suddenly said, looking her in the eye. She was once again startled because he had read her. She momentarily doubted whether Rael was a secret Yamanaka. I looked into you thoroughly. I met with your colleagues. They tried to hide it, sugarcoat it, but I can spot when someone's stealing credit. I also talked to the staff. One of the nice ones told me that you put in the work at the start, but in the end, you stopped caring. Turn lowered her gaze. At some point, it was difficult to keep doing the work without getting anything in return. Look at me, Rael said. Turn steeled herself. She didn't want to show vulnerability because people would use any weakness to target her. Work hard, produce results. That's all that matters with me, said Rael. How can I trust you? She asked. He was asking her to earn his trust, but what about the other way around? Before I answer that, do you want this? A chance to prove yourself, no matter how unfair it is to ask it, Rael asked. It was unfair. She had already tried her best to show that she was a competent agent regardless of her background. She knew she had proven herself, but it didn't matter because she needed to prove herself once again. Yes, I do, she replied. The tired part of her wanted just to give up and accept her position. The clan wouldn't allow her to quit, and no one was allowing her to work, so she might as well relax, draw her salary and enjoy the benefits. But a greater part of her wanted to do something that mattered. She wanted to feel productive. Her clan valued that she was in ANBU, but she was the one who joined it after passing the recruitment process. She loved the job because it felt like she was part of something bigger than herself, and she wanted that feeling back. So while she had been beaten down, she was willing to try once more, one last time. Give me a chance and I'll blow it out of the water, she said resolutely. Very well. Turn's spine turned cold for a moment before her combat instinct took over when a voice suddenly spoke from behind her. Someone had snuck behind her without her knowing. She turned around and froze to see Weasel standing behind her. See, Captain, she said in surprise as she quickly stood at attention. There was no doubt Rael had called him here. Show what you can do, Weasel said. His face betrayed no emotion, and his onyx eyes seemed to peer through her. If you can show me that you can contribute, I'll support you even if Rael, the squad, the domestic branch, or ANBU as a whole doesn't accept you. Those were still words by someone with higher authority who could renege on them just like others. And Uchiha endorsing a Shimura. In this environment? That's better than the Hokage's backing, Rael smiled. So, what do you say, Operative Turn? How is that for motivation? Turn swallowed as her heart began to beat faster. The flame of hope began to burn brighter. Chapter 439, If Weasel's word was one thing to believe in, then the intel sitting on Turn's desk was another thing that gave her hope it was going to be different this time. She thought she was in for a trial by fire where she would be left to fend for herself, but it seemed Rael was telling the truth about working together because he had provided her with credible information about a potential root associate that she was to build a case against. Everyone in the squad knew that Rael controlled the flow of information within the anti-root initiative by virtue of supplying the majority of the intel used by the initiative. It wasn't just her. He had given the rest of the squad the information they needed to get started within the Hidden Leaf Village, using the authority granted to them by being on the Rael assassination attempt case. She was even allowed access to an analyst from the Leaf Intelligence Division's analyst team assigned to the squad, who would give her requests priority over the rest of the squad. It was already more help than she had seen in the last 2 years. She felt lighter than she had since Root's exodus, as for once, everything seemed to be going up rather than down. But there was one thing that bothered her. She glanced out of her office at the noisy bullpen and stood up to walk to her door. She hadn't thought much about the number of desks in the bullpen that outnumbered the staff attached to the team, and simply thought that the office administrator had sent more by mistake. When the staff set up the extra desks instead of stacking them in a corner for someone to pick up, she was too stressed about her future in the squad for it to enter her mind. Today, she understood it wasn't a mistake in the first place when she saw half a dozen clones of Rael working around the bullpen. A section of the floor was reserved for them as clones used the extra desks as their workstations. She had passed by the meeting room and saw a time slot reservation after lunch by Rael and clones. She wasn't the only one taken aback. The staff and operatives chatted about it in the snack room. "Did you know about this?" Moore asked Bubuk. She shook her head as she sipped her coffee. They looked at Goshiro, the head of staff, who also denied knowing about it. Some thought that he was using clones because he wanted to help the squad get established as soon as possible, but the clones seemed far too comfortable working with each other for it to be something he did rarely. "But, I guess it makes sense. If he works like this regularly, he's a freak," Bubuk said. "You have to be careful with this stuff," Turn commented as she gazed at two clones arguing with each other. "More often than not, people will look at someone doing a good job and instead of praising them, they will dump more work on them. Imagine what a squad leader or a lieutenant like that would do if they found one of their operatives could shit out clones." The others nodded in agreement. ANBU was just like any other workplace. One's time at work heavily depended on who their manager was. People who worked under someone who viewed them as labor to be squeezed for work as hard as possible would have a terrible time. And once the boss does that, there will be at least one fucker on the team who will try to push some of their work on you. If you make the mistake of helping out, that's opening something you don't want to. Even if the others are understanding at the start, eventually, they'll become desensitized, stop caring and start doing the same. Turn spoke from experience, and her tone made it so others knew that as well. "Looks like he was lucky with his previous squad," Moore said as he blew on his hot tea. "Or maybe he wasn't," Goshiro commented. The others didn't have anything to say in response. However, over the week, everyone came to the horrifying realization that Rael's clones weren't a special case, it was something he did every day, and that he had done it so much that he had optimized his work life around it. Rael created a shadow clone, and then they created a few water clones each. For some reason, he had a time limit for his shadow clone, so to make the most out of the clone's time, he took his lunch late. He had created a system of effective communication and was absurdly good at note-taking. Through those skills, he knew what every clone had done during the day before they were dismissed. And then they learned something more concerning. "You can't force clones to do something they don't want to," Aquila said. He had mentioned it to his family, and someone familiar with clones had told him that lesser-known fact. Then people began to notice other things about their boss. Rael came in early and left late. He, and his clones, took the bare minimum breaks and kept themselves busy. He was invested and wanted to know what they were doing, and because he used clones, instead of update meetings, he talked to people individually, allowing him to know things better because he could spend a bit more time on each person without wasting anyone else's time. That enabled him to run a smooth ship by helping coordinate everyone's efforts at a high level. He was much more involved than other squad leaders, but never micromanaged. At first, everyone was happy. Their boss was doing a good job at running the team, and he was also a hard worker, working on his own cases. But then, things began to turn as a thought entered their minds. Was he expecting them to work as hard as he did? Watching their boss work hard motivated them to work hard as well, but almost instantly, it turned from motivation to pressure. Seeing all the clones work hard and long became too much. They could only do so much. They only wanted to do so much because it couldn't be any clearer that Rael was a workaholic. They felt trapped. The clones worked in the bullpen, so it felt as though their boss had eyes on them constantly, making them conscious of what they were doing all the time. Operatives have the liberty to come and go from the office according to the needs of their work, but the desk-bound staff members found it difficult to leave work on time when the boss was working late almost every day. However, they couldn't say anything. Complaining a few weeks into the formation of the squad wasn't an option. How would Rael feel about that? What if the word reached Weasel, whose impression would be formed by Rael's word. What if it reached Stag? The ANBU commander had personally visited their offices, something he rarely did, even with captains, as they all visited him. So, they simmered in silence until Rael called a Monday morning all-hands meeting. "You're all idiots." Rael started the meeting with a sigh. "It should be obvious that you don't compete with a team of clones, and trying to do so is foolish. Putting in more hours doesn't guarantee better results, let alone positive ones. In the end, all that matters is getting the job done. Everyone has their own process, so stick to it while making sure you don't unnecessarily inconvenience others. But we will have a problem if you perform poorly, so work smarter, not harder. It's one of my goals to make us into the best squad in ANBU. Now, I'll admit, I didn't see this coming, or else I would have dealt with it much sooner. And since none of you said anything to me, the resolution was only delayed. I should have expected that as well. I can't believe I'm saying this, but we need HR." Everyone in the room looked at each other to see if anyone understood what he was saying. "From now on, if anyone has a problem and they don't want to say it straight to my face, which I don't mind, they can discuss it with Goshiro. He will listen to your problems before bringing them to me, anonymously." The tension in the room drained visibly when Rael made it clear that he wasn't expecting them to run themselves ragged. He even proposed a delayed shift system in which a different staff member each day of the week would come in later than others, so they could stay late to support any operative working after hours. Not all problems were solved. The presence of clones was still a point of pressure, but everyone understood that not everything could be resolved instantly. They were satisfied that he had acknowledged the problem and even set up the HR system with Goshiro to discuss more problems. However, Rael's voice cut through the relieved chatter. "Heed my words because this is a warning. I will not stop using clones. I believe I'm better than you, my clones are better than you." He didn't care about the frowns in the room and continued. "I said, work smarter, not harder, but I work longer, harder, and smarter than you, and so do each one of my clones. You'll quickly realize that I will outperform each and every one of you, and I'm confident in that claim. Be careful because if you don't produce impressive results, you might find me overshadowing the rest of the squad collectively, that there's such a big gap between what I did and what you managed to do individually, that even if your work is good by normal standards, it might pale when put next to mine." Even though he addressed the entire squad, the 5 operatives knew he was talking to them. "If you're not careful, I might just end up drowning you," Rael said with a smidge of smugness as though he was taunting them from a position of superiority. It happened often in anything that could be compared. If 2 theatrical plays were released simultaneously, and one of them was good but the second was groundbreaking, then most people would choose to watch the second one and thus would shower it with love, sing its praise, and recommend it all the while the other would fail to garner much attention, even if it were splendid enough to be the talk of the town if it were released at any other time. He was the squad leader, and they were his operatives. They would know about their contributions, but outsiders would be blind to them because when others talked about their squad, they talked about Rael's squad. Unless the operatives managed to get their names out there, no one would know about them. Rael's name was the barrier, and if that name got bigger, the barrier they would need to break through would grow thicker. Rael gazed over the room, and Turn knew she wasn't overthinking when she saw his gaze linger in her direction briefly. Was it a warning, threat, or friendly reminder? It was whatever the one listening to it thought it to be, but one thing was clear: Rael's squad was going to be a good place to work, but it wasn't going to be the chair next to a fireplace in a snowstorm. He had set the tone. Chapter 440. A month had passed since the official initiation of Rael's squad, and the team as a whole had settled down in their new situation. They were still figuring out their new job and in the process of getting familiar with their team members. "I want to take over the anti-root initiative," Takuma said. 3 operatives sitting before him shared glances at the absurd claim that could be misunderstood in a dozen different ways. Captain Weasel, their boss, was in charge of the anti-root initiative. What did taking over mean in that context? "How do you propose we do that?" Boo-Book asked. She assumed he wasn't talking about doing something absurd like stealing authority from his own boss. "Information is king. For an entity like Root that plays in shadows and covers its tracks, you need credible information to do anything against them. Until now, I've been the source of information for half of the operatives associated with the initiative. I want to increase that to at least 3/4 by the end of the calendar year. A lot of operatives in the initiative were hooked on the intel Takuma provided because it made their work easier. Unlike him, all the initiative members were part-time. They had an existing caseload from the squads and units they primarily belonged to, so getting information from someone else eliminated the most time-consuming part of the process. I want them to latch onto us because of the easy, high-quality information only we can acquire. Once they see how easy it can be, they'll find it difficult to go back to hunting for information, thus allowing us to influence them into doing our bidding, he said. Most ANBU felt some level of duty towards the village and nation and worked hard to protect it, but that didn't mean they were spared from office politics present in every workplace. Most people in the initiative were there to put themselves in a better position and often calculated how to do that efficiently. Handling everything from start to finish would earn them more credit, but it would eat into time they didn't have. While sharing significant credit and becoming tied to do someone else's bidding sounded unattractive, but in the long term, it seemed like a good deal. Of course, everyone started out aiming to be the top contributor, but that time had passed and most people realized their place in the hierarchy within the initiative. Most now aim to have the tag of an anti-Root initiative member and some solid work to back it up. Work that they could earn by moving on good information. Takuma was already at the top of the anti-Root initiative, but he wasn't satisfied. The squad was a welcome improvement, and they were going to be trusted executives of his, but he needed more manpower. When the Hokage summoned him to his office and asked him what he thought about the Root, he answered that they were a cancer to be purged out as aggressively as possible. He needed the anti-Root initiative, full of egotistical operatives who were constantly weighing every move to see if it was worth their time, to do his bidding in order to accomplish his vision. Are we going to interfere with others' information-gathering efforts? Moore asked, tapping a finger against the table. One way to get more operatives to rely on Takuma's information was to make it difficult for them to source it on their own. There were many ways to do so, ranging from shitty to outright illegal, and asking the team to do any of those things was a difficult ask. No, that would be detrimental to everyone. I want to make it happen by simply being better, Takuma said. He didn't want to fling mud on others to make himself look better. That's easier said than done, Hippo said as he poured a special blend of flower tea from a thermos that his wife had prepared for him into a cup. We'll have to cultivate relationships all over the country, find competent, and more importantly, trustworthy people we can rely on. Within this calendar year, you said? That's a tall ask. Never said it was going to be easy in the first place, Takuma replied from behind the podium, but it's something we must do. All of us in this room will be working on this initiative. This will occupy the majority of my workload. I'd like you to give this equal priority to whatever you're working on currently. Even though it sounded like a request, it was an order when it came from the boss. Takuma stepped out from behind the podium and distributed 100-page thick stacks to the trio. Use this to get started. Coordinate and divide the leads among yourselves, he said before leaving the room to move on to whatever he was doing next. The three of them stayed behind and flipped through the thick documents. What the? Boo Book, with her experience with the anti-Root initiative, was the first to realize what she had in her hands. The document was full of leads of possible acquaintances and associates of Root. ANBU always kept an eye on Root and what they were doing, and while the latter managed to keep themselves hidden, the former still managed to glean a few things like who they were using to do their bidding. But the information was shoddy at best. If it were credible, ANBU would have already used it, and thus, there was never any central effort to pursue or consolidate it. But here it was, all collected in one document. The incidents ANBU suspected Root to have a hand in, the people of interest tied to those cases, possible reasons why Root had used their invisible hand of influence. If he had just collected the information, it still would have been a huge thing because having things in a single place in itself was extremely helpful. But he had processed the jumbled mess of information to make it easy to parse. This wasn't something anyone could collect in a month or even double or triple that time. Boo Book looked out of the meeting room at the clones working in the bullpen. No, even that wasn't enough to accomplish something of this level in such a short period. That could only mean one thing, and it made her take in a big gulp of air. Rael had been planning to take over the anti-root initiative for a while. He was going to do it regardless of whether he got his own squad or not. Here's a thought, Moore said to the room as he flipped through the document. The initiative is unhappy with us, but what happens when 3/4 of them are getting fed information by us? They'll have to wag their tails if they want to remain in his good graces. At that point, does what the remaining quarter thinks matter? Boo Book gave him a silent glance. Had Rael really thought that far ahead? Straight-faced. Taro felt a mix of nervousness and annoyance as he sat in front of the ANBU with a badger mask. Over the past month, all members of his team had been getting hit by work from the new ANBU squad they had been assigned to. They thought it would take some time before they would be receiving requests as the squad settled down and got comfortable with themselves, but 2 weeks into their starting, it seemed someone had lit a fire under their asses. One by one, his teammates were assigned multiple requests and inquiries. It was almost too much work over a short period of time. He dreaded his turn and got ready for the work dump coming his way, only for it to not happen. He wasn't assigned any requests, but it wasn't like he was idle because he contributed as support for his teammates in need. But when more time passed and still no work was assigned to him, especially when his team members were taking on more requests, it bothered him greatly. Was it because he was the youngest? His boss was a faulty person, like everyone else, and he wore too much cologne, which made meetings miserable, but at least he didn't discount him because of his young age. Which could only mean that the ANBU squad had barred him from leading any requests. He tried to confirm with his boss, who denied it, but Taro found it hard to believe. And now, the leader of the ANBU squad was sitting across from him in the meeting room alone. Taro's boss and the ANBU liaison had been there for the first 5 minutes before leaving. "Do you enjoy your work, Jin and Oishi Taro?" asked Rael. Taro's eye twitched at his voice, distorted by chakra. He couldn't get used to it. It made it feel like there wasn't a person behind the mask and cloak. He pondered how to respond to the question. Did he enjoy his work? It hadn't been his choice. His mother had gotten him the job and he had been working there since then. "I'm good at it," Taro replied. He was sure it wasn't going to be the passion of his life, but he didn't need passion to do good work. Good? Competent. He had worked countless hours over the past years and gained a respectable amount of skill. "I need someone competent. Are you up for the job?" "Yes, I am," Taro said, clenching his fist underneath his desk. What was this? "It's going to be hard. I wouldn't expect anything less from ANBU. Then let's work together. May I ask a question?" He didn't know what he was doing. He just needed to nod along and get to work. "I haven't been assigned any requests from your squad. Would you happen to know the reason behind it?" He didn't have much in terms of professional aspirations, and his main one out of his job was to earn enough money to support his life. He enjoyed cinema and theater, loved to do casual calligraphy and visited calligraphy exhibits in his free time, and wanted to spend his time with friends and family. As long as his job allowed him to do that, he was satisfied. The people who knew him to be indolent, which was true, but it was a mistake to think he was averse to work. Being lazy didn't mean he didn't care about what others thought about him. It was true that he had a lesser workload as the support, but that didn't mean he liked it because it very directly implied that he wasn't considered suitable for his job when he had performed comparably to his peers. If he did the same work, he wanted to be treated the same. "Because you'll be exclusively working for me," the ANBU replied, surprising Taro. "Pardon? Me?" "Yes, you. May I ask why?" "I like that you ask questions, Jin and Taro. I feel we will get along well if you keep asking the right ones. To answer your question, you're working for me because you're the least experienced in your team. I assign the more experienced members to my team. I want them to have the best resources. So I am subpar?" Taro thought with great displeasure. "I pick you because I'm a fan of your mother's work and hold deep respect for your father," said Rael. Taro was again whipped with surprise. And my parents? You looked into me? I looked into your entire team's background. That's standard ANBU procedure. Can't have my operatives working with someone unreliable, the ANBU said nonchalantly before leaning ahead. His voice became smoother as he asked, "Are you unreliable, Jin and Taro?" "No, I'm not," Taro said quickly and with some force. "Did you really pick me because of my parents?" He felt a heavy discomfort in his pit. As much as he didn't like it, he was fine if someone disrespected him, but his work influencing his parents' reputation wasn't something he could accept. They had nothing to do with his work, so it was unfair that they would get affected by it. "Of course not. I chose you because I can afford some delay or mistakes due to your relative inexperience. Don't get me wrong, I'm not assuming you're incompetent unless you give me a reason. I'm demanding but fair. As long as you perform reasonably well, we will have no problems." Taro gazed at the ANBU, who claimed that they would have no problems, but they already had a problem because Taro didn't like the rude masked bastard very much. Well, not that he could say anything about it. Chapter 441. In the early hours of the meeting, when most people were yet to awaken, Takuma stretched and warmed up in a dirt training field. He expected to come to dislike them after the second assassination attempt on his life, but as it turned out, his loving, abusive relationship with the training facilities where he regularly busted his ass was overpowering. A few meters from him, a hungover Anko had a curved back and hunched shoulders with her half-moon eyes glazed in lethargy, no doubt that she would be asleep within seconds of her lying on the ground beneath her feet. They had gotten together to spar. "Are you ready?" And the one to referee their spar was Join Kurenai Yuhi. At their level, having a referee was essential. There was an official statistic about shinobi deaths during spars without appropriate supervision. Anko said, clearing her throat. She straightened her back and raised her hand behind her head to tie her hair with the elastic hair band around her waist. Takuma nodded and pulled out his sword from its scabbard. She eyed it momentarily. "Are you any good with that?" "You can find out," he replied. A lazy smirk grew on her lips. She gave a short nod to Kurenai, who warned both of them to get ready before chucking a kunai into the air between them. There was not a hint of hesitation between them as both rushed towards the other the moment the sharpened metal hit the ground. Takuma was faster and readied his sword. He planned to overwhelm her from the moment of first contact and not let go. Anko brought her hand forward, and Kurenai's kunai shot up into her hand as though she had used the Hidden Sands magnetic release bloodline limit. Only to immediately realize that it was a chakra string. She dipped into her weapon's pouch with her other hand and flung several kunai above their heads. There was no time to think about the move as they clashed into contact. He stuck to his plan and slashed his sword with power. Anko's grip tightened around the kunai as their blades screeched against each other, only to have the kunai stripped from her hand. He reset his position and soared to attack his unarmed opponent, but she snatched two kunai out of the air and continued her attack without giving him a chance to overturn the momentum. She stabbed them down at his shoulders, forcing him to block them with the flat of his blade. She stepped even closer to decrease the space available for him to swing his sword, but Takuma skipped back before she could stab him in the side with her kunai. One of the kunai that were still in the air fell behind her, and she kicked it back up with her Achilles, all the while staring at him with her chin raised to air. It was entirely performative and thus completely unnecessary. She was playing with him. Before he could even get offended by it, she chucked both of her kunai at him. She didn't pull her hands back to gather force. Instead, she flicked them with just her wrists, thus catching him by faint surprise. As he deflected them with his sword, she was already signing hand seals. Two orbs of fire bloomed in her palms. He instantly recognized the jutsu. It was among her favorites and a staple. Fire release, twin flame whips. With a jerk of her arms, the orbs turned into fiery whips that instantly scorched the ground they touched. He instantly stabbed his sword and weaved his own set of hand seals. Yang release, fire dragon scales. Takuma's skin wriggled like a pit of worms, as though it would burst, before turning darker and drier until his skin had taken the appearance of aggressive reptilian scales resembling those of a dragon. She grabbed the kunai in the air with a whip and swung it around, building speed and power, before throwing it at him. It was only a distraction as she rushed at him, and she was faster than before. By the time he sidestepped, she was already in range, or at least her whips were in range. One of them latched onto the sword, dousing him in the scorching heat. A toothy grin stretched across her face as she pulled. And to his surprise, his feet skid forward. To his surprise, his feet skid forward, digging into the dirt as he tried to resist and keep his balance. This is ridiculous, he thought. He was the one doing all the training with weighted gear, so how was she this strong? She swung her other whip that he deftly avoided while jerking the whip wrapped around his sword to pull her off balance before grabbing the second whip and pulling it with all of his power. Even if she was strong, he was stronger. "Oh!" Anko uttered as she briefly went airborne. In that moment, the whip around the sword loosened. Takuma zoomed forward, leaving behind a burst of dirt in his wake. Whips worked wonders at a distance, but the moment the enemy came in close, they lost all of their advantage. However, he knew that she already had a workaround to that limitation. Anko flicked her wrist, and the long, fiery whips disappeared into black smoke and reappeared in the form of a pair of riding whips. She spun in midair and hit the flat of his sword with both of her crops. A blast of hot, whistling fire swallowed him. He held his breath and forced his swing forward to throw her back. He didn't pursue her and leapt back instead. The dragon scales were fuming with white smoke, and when he looked at the palm he had used to grab the whip, the scales had turned completely black, on the verge of crumbling. A C-rank fire release ninjutsu had done this much damage against a jutsu handcrafted to be resistant to heat, when not long ago, she had used the same jutsu to train and temper fire dragon scales during his preparation for learning the shadow clone jutsu. She had become absurdly strong in a short period of time. Takuma gritted his teeth as he tossed his sword aside and weaved hand seals. Water release, spirit water wave. He aimed the water globe forward and dumped the entire load of water bullets towards Anko, who had just recovered. The drowsiness was no longer visible in her eyes as she weaved hand seals, while the fires from the crops gathered and wrapped around her forearms, and slammed her hands onto the ground. Earth release, ram head. A curved wall with a figure of a ram's head on the outer surface slid up from the ground. Some bullets were blocked while others drilled through. He tried to look through the holes and caught sight of her clothes. He immediately sped forward while gathering chakra in his arms, when a gust of wind swept against him. Anko shot up high into the sky, air propelling her upwards. She wove another set of hands and clasped them together. Her spine curved as air filled her diaphragm with air and chakra before spitting out the concoction that sparked into fire just outside her mouth. A burning mass of fire descended upon him, covering his vision. A B-rank ninjutsu? No, this was still C-rank, just pushed to its furthest limits. Takuma hastily weaved hand seals and pushed his hands into the ground. Earth release, earthen dome. The mass hit the dome and then spread out, dousing a large portion of the dirt field in a sea of fire. Inside the dome, Takuma felt the flames eat through the earth and the chakra that flowed through it until they stopped. He breathed a sigh of relief before immediately going into another set of hand seals for earth release, subterranean voyage to escape from beneath the dome because he knew that Anko would target him with the dome the moment he stepped out. But just as he completed the hand seals, the dome was ripped open, and Anko, with a smile full of sadistic energy, grabbed him as he was already halfway sinking into the ground, pulled him out and threw him into the air before leaping after him with the fire around her forearms reformed into her weapons, a long whip and riding crop each. Still stunned from having his jutsu interrupted halfway when he wasn't expecting it, Takuma was a heartbeat late to gather himself in the air. He rotated himself to face Anko, only to get hit by the long, fiery whip that wrapped around him and strapped his arms to his body, taking them out of the equation. She knew that Takuma's most powerful weapons were his two arms. The already damaged dragon scales began to scorch under the whips. The heat began to penetrate his body and burn. Ugh! Takuma gritted his teeth and pushed through. With his arms out, he gathered chakra into his leg. One strong, properly placed kick could be his ticket out of the situation. But then Anko pulled on him with her whip as they were both midair, further closing in the distance between them, throwing off his calculations. As they met in the air, Takuma let go of his conscious thoughts and pulled from the subconscious, letting his instincts guide him. He struck out at the same time as she did with her crop, but at the same time, Anko wrapped the remaining length of her whip around the incoming kick and pulled once again, throwing it off course. Instead of making contact with her body, it whiffed in the air. The last thing Takuma saw was the crop made from compressed flames hitting his face and Anko's grinning face of pleasure behind it. Straight-faced. What happened to her? Takuma asked after waking up in a few minutes. He stared at Anko, who had found a patch of grass and weeds in the fringes of the dirt field and was resting there. She was stronger and faster than he remembered when they had last sparred. Her ninjutsu had become abnormally stronger. If it was just twin flame whips, he could have understood it because it was her favorite ninjutsu, but all of her jutsu felt like they were doped with steroids. And then she had shown ninjutsu from 3 different releases. He knew she could use fire release and earth release, but wind release had been a first, which itself wasn't surprising because he also, technically, knew ninjutsu from 3 releases, but the way she used them seemed far too natural. He wanted to know how she had improved so much. She's going through a very important part of her journey as a kunoichi, Kurenai said. She sat on a boulder beside him and continued when he looked at her. Her understanding of chakra is evolving. Everything you saw today is because of that. As in advanced chakra training? He asked. Shape and nature manipulation would indeed answer how her ninjutsu had become so much stronger. She was pulling much more out of the chakra and the ninjutsu. You can say that, but it's more than that. Kurenai smiled in a way that said it was okay for him not to understand. For a shinobi, everything we do is tied to chakra. All of our shinobi arts directly depend on chakra as the foundation. If your understanding of chakra develops, everything else is positively affected as well. What you're seeing from her is a rapid advancement in her understanding of that foundation. It even affected her physique. Chakra enhanced physical strength and conditioning training. As the understanding of chakra increased, so did the benefits from physical training. It was among the reasons why weighted gear had fallen out of fashion. Shinobi would rather focus on developing their understanding of chakra and then reap the benefits that came with it. Is she doing anything particular to get this evolution? Takuma asked. He planned to ask Anko as well, but Kurenai was a jonin, so she was bound to have some higher-level insight into the topic. Well, the biggest thing is that she's trying now. Kurenai smiled as she gazed at her friend. I think you know it, but she hadn't really been trying for the longest time. Takuma nodded. It was rare for Anko to talk about her past, but they had had a conversation about it. But ever since she returned from the war, the fire that was extinguished was relit. It took some time, but she has managed to ditch years of bad habits, most of them. She does like to party, Takuma chuckled. Kurenai nodded with a sigh. That girl is a genius. If she had never stopped, maybe. She sighed again. No, perhaps it wouldn't have made any difference. Anyway, this is the result of her talent-meeting effort. Takuma smiled. While he was a little frustrated that she had pulled away from him, even though he had been busting his ass to his limit, he was happy for her because he truly felt that she was happier than before. Work harder, he sighed. But you said it's an important point in her life. What did you mean by that? Because it's special. Her understanding of chakra is generational. Kurenai smiled, proud of her friend. There are many names for it: enlightenment, epiphany, awakening, bodhi, but to put it simply, her understanding of chakra is reaching that of a jonin. Huh. It's an evolution. If she's successful, she'll become a jonin. That's the end of this tale for now. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in part 23. Peace.